Good evening, fellow heretics. Welcome to tonight's episode of Nerds and Heresy. I'm your host, Captain Dadpool. Y'all know the best part about being an internet micro celebrity, besides all that sweet cheddar, is I've gotten to know all of these scholars, and at any time I can call them or text them for any questions I have. And that's it's almost like, if I can use an analogy that I'm going to pull out of my ass, it's almost like a veil was torn, and I can now have access to like the holy of holies of scholarships. I don't know where I got that from, but that's what it feels like, and it's the coolest thing in the world. And I can also have them come on the show and help me respond to some apologetics, and I'm going to do that now. But first, let's watch.
Hold on to your butts.
All right, we lost one already. Not off to a good start.
Gotta fix the lasagna.
Oh, the lasagna. Wow. Well, yeah, so we had Dr. Kip Davis. I'm hoping he'll be back soon. But in the meantime, do y'all want to give a quick introduction?
Pat, you want to go
Ladies
first?
Dr. Fry.
Oh, ladies first. Wow. Chivalry is not dead.
I know.
My name is Dr. Fry. My background is I have a PhD in Old Testament from Stellenbosch University in South Africa. I work primarily with texts of terror, but my background is as an ex-fundamentalist. And it's really fun to be here because I am specifically trained and coddled in the Westminster Theological Seminary School for Van Til's Apologetics and took those classes on prolegomena. So I know the arguments that were used, and very, very fun. So, hi.
And just by point of clarification, you consider the Hebrew Bible a text of terror. I just want to,
Well,
oh boy, here we go.
Just
it does. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I would consider the works of the other church fathers the same way. So.
Oh, well, 100%. Yes. Yeah. Well, if we're going to talk about this, all of it was committed from a space of traumatization, and then it just continued to propel more trauma, which isn't really any different from today. But at the same time, I do wary on calling the whole of the Hebrew Bible a text of terror, just because I don't want to come off as anti-Semitic.
Okay. I just was trying to make it funny.
No, it was funny.
It wasn't funny, Pat. Try harder next time.
God,
yes.
Pat.
God.
I didn't even hear it, and I already know it wasn't funny.
It's pretty fair.
Pat, what do you got going on in your life? You're over here.
Well, my name is Pat Lowinger. I'm a professor of ancient history and archaeology at Peninsula College. I have master's degrees in ancient history and archaeology. Currently working on hopefully what will be a terminal degree in archaeology. But until you actually get it, you can't say it. Everybody with a PhD says the one thing you don't say is I'm getting a PhD, because you never say that. So it's like jinxing it. And so my focus, and the reason I guess I've been invited here, is I recently completed a manuscript on the early Christian church, particularly the intersection between women, their societal and legal roles, and how that changed through the Orthodox tradition and ultimately accumulated in their subjugation, both legally and societally.
Cheers.
Thank you.
I'm very excited for that.
We're all very
Dr.
excited.
Kip.
Hey, how you doing?
We could feel it radiating off our screens. We got going on, Dr. Kip.
Reason. Oh, hey. No, I was going to say the real reason Pat is here is because there was real concern about the fact that there would be two Old Testament scholars engaging with the New Testament, and the universe could potentially explode as a result. So Pat's here to make sure things stay sane.
That is like one, like when I'm trying to think of scholars that I could bring on, like, why don't I know any New Testament scholars? You're all Old
Why
Testament
don't I
scholars
know
on
any New
YouTube.
Testament scholars?
What is it like? Why can't I find any New Testament scholars on YouTube? They're all so,
They're out there.
They are.
They are.
qualified.
I'm
I can't find them.
I'm a
I
generalist
attract Old
in
Testament scholars. I don't know what it is about me.
the Roman period of the Mediterranean. I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah.
All right.
So,
Anything else before we want to get started?
no.
Oh yeah, you didn't really
I don't.
do your introduction, Dr. Kip.
Oh,
Who are you?
okay. Who am I?
I kind of skipped over you. Sorry, we got distracted.
I'm Kip
It's gonna happen a lot.
Davis, and I am a specialist in Dead Sea Scrolls and early Judaism, and I do a little bit with the Hebrew Bible too, and I have a YouTube channel, and I'm doing a series right now on the Dead Sea Scrolls. And one of these days, if I, don't continually getting distracted by nonsense, I'm gonna finish the third installment. So.
And your YouTube channel would be on YouTube?
YouTube. It's on YouTube, guys.
There's links below to all these guys. Or you all
Yeah.
over here. There's links in the description below. Highly recommend checking them out. Dr. Fry has a whole website. Dr. Kip's YouTube link is down there. Pat, I just put your Facebook down there because I don't know what else.
Yeah. Well, I have my blog where I post some of my academic papers, Discovering Ancient History with Pat Lowinger. And you can look at some of my stuff on academia.edu. It's okay.
Academia.
There's
Best
also a
place
link
to get stuff for free.
There's also a link to the
Little hell.
hold on, what's happening here? Okay, there's a Chrome tab. There's also a link to this original video if anybody cares to watch. It's 2 hours long. We're going to hit some highlights tonight, and the links to each of these 4 individuals are in the description as well. I highly recommend checking out their content. And Steven I'm actually going to be, he invited me onto his show. This coming Monday, the 27th on Monday. I'm going to be going and show.
Sorry, what's that? Who's invited you?
Steven Boyce.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
The guy, guy in the bottom corner. Yeah, so I'm going to be going on his channel chatting with him.
I didn't even realize he had a channel.
I didn't either.
Yeah, I mean, I
mean-
talk to him on Twitter all the time, and I didn't know he had a
Doesn't
channel.
every apologist have a YouTube channel?
Heyo, zing.
Don't, guy. Yeah,
Oh.
he'll be
So-
sad if you call him an apologist.
I give him more credit than that. I actually have some very nice things to say about him.
Yeah,
Oh.
And so does Dr. Kip, actually. So
Alexiana's like, no.
Nice.
look at scholars and apologists getting along. It's so cute.
Ah.
But he's not really an apologist. He's actually,
Yeah, he's actually
he does legitimate stuff.
yeah.
So
yeah.
but yeah.
All right, so before we get into the heady stuff, at the end of this video, I got a little spicy, and they didn't appreciate it very much. So I'm going to go over that and get you guys' thoughts on if I handled that right, or if I could have handled it better, could I have articulated my thoughts better.
Just to
That's-
clarify, you're asking Kip and I if you got too spicy.
Well,
Not
Dr.
the
Fry's
best
here
frame
too,
of-
and she's
Okay, good.
probably
good.
has a better grasp.
Definitely the voice of reason now.
I like to think I'm compassionate sometimes.
It's a good trait, I'm told.
All right.
Oh yeah, here's my favorite part.
I have some appreciation for him because he puts more effort
here's
into
okay.
arguments than most.
It's a little
apologists
quiet.
out
Can you turn the volume up?
But that's kind of a double-edged sword because the more you know, the more you have to ignore in order to make. I'm quiet in the video. You don't get to play the ignorance. I didn't know that. I think they're louder than me. Mike Jones almost certainly knows everything I've said in this video. As a matter of fact, I know he does.
Yep.
But he doesn't tell you any of it. He doesn't bring that up because it's counter to his argument. Maybe he has before in other videos. I'm not sure, but he definitely didn't in this one. He only picks what information he wants you to have to support his arguments. He doesn't show both sides. But that is the nature of apologetics. It is a dying field, slowly but surely a dying field.
Not for white men.
Cherry-picked information is what is needed to keep Hey, your yo. life support.
You feel
Sorry, I didn't think that was spicy at all. But
Hold on. Well, yeah.
You left out this.
Go on.
They're sad
I could
about it.
respond with this data that you didn't.
Yeah, I hit the button by accident. No, I didn't. On 141.10.
But yeah, we should hear what they have to say about it.
Just that's why I'm.
into actual personal attacks. It just shows me how
Yeah, let me go back to 139.30. It's only another 30 seconds.
Of course, Michael knows this. Of course, I know
Yeah.
the stuff that you're going to appeal to. All of us here have read Ehrman. We've read the critics, right? But to just sit here and say something like, well, he doesn't want you to know these things. Let's interpret it this charitably, because I'm sure that you've read you've heard all the arguments that we have to give, right? And yet in your own videos, you never talk about the positive evidence for Christianity, the reliability of the Gospels, right? You talk about the evidence that you think is good. That's the same thing that we do in our videos. So in a small TikTok video, I think it's completely unreasonable to expect people to add in objections on all this other stuff. I just think it's complete hypocrisy.
Yeah, I mean, it is, because we could easily just point out he left out so many things. I mean, we talked about him getting P66 wrong earlier. We talked about him not mentioning a lot of the evidence we went over. I didn't go into a lot of the arguments Bauckham gave for the epilogue of John's Gospel.
Literally,
I mean, it's funny to me how I see anti-theist apologists like this constantly saying that we're biased, that we only want to show what you want, and then you see this kind of crap get pulled around. Okay, Captain Dadpole, you know damn well that was a 3-minute TikTok video. I'm giving highlights. I'm not going to have time to go into everything. I could go through numerous ones of your videos and go, well, you left out this moment. I could respond with this data that you didn't mention. Does that mean you are, cherry picking data? You don't want your audience to see things? No, because I'm going to try to interpret you charitably. Why is it that people that are so anti-Christian turn a lot of intellectual disagreement into actual personal attacks? It just shows me how you have a bias and an emotional reason for Christianity to be wrong if that's how you take intellectual disagreement. All
right. So what do y'all think? Was I too straightforward? Could I have worded that different? My mouth does get away from me from time to time, and I need to be checked. So what do y'all think? Was I not being fair there?
You sent a 15-minute video to them, and they responded with a 2-hour long video. So I don't really understand. Okay.
I do think it's funny that Tran, Exploring Reality, the host, referred to Dr. Ehrman as a critic, not a critical scholar, and then was talking about how I've read their work, but you referred to him as a critic, not a critical scholar, and there's a big difference.
Yeah.
Ehrman is doing a fair analysis. You don't like what he says, so he's a critic. He's not a critical scholar.
It's just interesting for people who are Dr. Fry. We spent 2 hours talking about the data. Anyway, I know. I need a minute.
So, okay, well, while you take a minute, maybe I can. I've given this some thought over the last few days, and like I think I get this too, quite a bit when I make response videos, and I'll be honest, there are times where I have to kind of take a step back now before I hit, publish on some of those response videos, just based on the kind of feedback that I've gotten, which has sort of it's surprised me, because I guess coming from the world of academics, where my work is picked apart to little itty bits on a regular basis, coming into this venue and to have people get upset about things I hear quite often are, you're not charitable, you didn't steel man my argument, you took people complain all the time about being taken out of context. I don't know how often I've seen that. I've heard that charged of me, and I oftentimes in response, I'm going back to the work that I've done and thinking, what? How I don't get it half the time. And I think part of the problem here is that, okay, so, you know, part of this is education. I'm interested in teaching people about the Bible and about biblical. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? That stuff. The biblical scholarship. I'm interested in teaching people about that. But any of us who are making videos on YouTube, we're also trying to entertain. And entailed with that is a certain amount of rhetoric that is going to engage your audience. It needs to be, oh geez, this guy.
Here we go.
So, but there's a certain amount of rhetoric that's going to go into any kind of video response, especially a short one. I don't understand why some people complain so much about it. I think if you're putting yourself out there, if you're publishing, a video for all the world to see, you should expect some pushback. And you should expect some of that pushback maybe to be a little bit unfair, but it bewilders me at the amount of hurt feelings I see from people complaining about responses.
So this is common
to their videos.
Yeah.
It's pretty common. So
I don't know
a little bit.
Yeah, please.
What's that?
Now that you've had a minute.
Yeah, I've had a minute. I'm done being a terrible person. It's fine. I'm sorry I don't have the Spirit of God within me.
When did you start being a terrible? Oh.
Yeah. All said, what I did notice, in the defensiveness, and this is very common, again, as somebody who is a trauma scholar, somebody who studies trauma. How many more times do I need to say it? I will say it again. It is difficult to be presented with information that could upend an ideology, especially if that ideology is the very foundation for what information you're picking and choosing, right? And so I can also understand why some of what was said at the end that got spicy and was seen as a personal attack, then became very personally upsetting to people. And that's pretty par for the course. And not to say that's illegitimate by any means, but I taught undergrad New Testament, even as an Old Testament scholar. I taught undergrad New Testament. And so when presented with some of the data that they do not maybe see as more legitimate than theirs, it can be upsetting for students who were taught something differently and base a lot of truth and worldview around those things. That's just very normal. And so I do want to consider, while I think no, I'm not going to use that word. I get it. There's a reason why they said the things that they did, and the 2-hour response in comparison to a 15-minute video, and then also it being, I can't present this in a 3-minute video, TikTok, whatever, back and forth.
To be fair, my 15-minute video was in response to a 3-minute video of theirs. So. Totally.
Yeah, that is very fair. That is very fair.
So we're hoping to keep this under 4 hours. So.
But it is traumatic to find out things that might shake your worldview. It's traumatic and it's hard, and you get the decision as how to respond to that. Oh boy.
God damn it, Dr. Josh. All right, here's what I'll say. This is a fans.
Oh my
watching. I
gosh,
don't know
she's
who
being
else is watching.
sarcastic. Now I know who that is. Get out of here.
Yeah.
Serious.
He's convincing, isn't he? You should hear his
Get
Kent
out
Hovind
of here.
impression.
So legitimate. Okay.
Here's what I'll say to
Let's
Than and
see.
these guys,
Funny.
whoever's watching. How do I say this? I haven't rehearsed this. I don't know what's about to come out of my mouth. This is me talking to you this way in such a straightforward manner is a good thing. That means I have respect for you. That means I want to dialogue with you. People that I don't like, I don't talk to. I don't interact with their content. I don't watch their shows. I don't like them. I don't want to. They don't exist in my brain. That's what I would do to you if I didn't like you. There's a pretty prominent atheist YouTube creator that I went on his show one day. I don't fuck with him anymore. But at the time we were friends, and he's a mythicist, and I did a debate with him on historic Jesus. And I was talking to him this way on his show, and it was like, really? This is how you interpret this? Really? Where are you getting that from? This is what you like. That's how I was talking to him because he was a friend at the time. So it's considered a good thing that I'm talking to you this way because I think you can handle it. I know you can handle it. Don't prove me wrong. Right? Don't prove me wrong there. But at the same time, I will try harder not to make my straightforwardness not seem so personal. Right? I will absolutely do my part in adjusting my language. So I do apologize that I worded that way, but I'm still going to be spicy. We're going to be spicy as shit tonight. So buckle up. But
you said be serious. You said
man.
I can't drink because I had to stay serious.
I promised Stephen Boyce I would be nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I might be a little aggressive, but I'm not going to be personal.
Yeah, we'll take there will be a 2-minute intermission while I get a beer. But you're replying, Exploring Reality had a comment. Pat, I'm on the record saying a scholar. I didn't say you didn't go on the record, but in that summation, when you were addressing scholarship that was not, and you were bringing Dr. Ehrman up, you called him a critic. Now, I'm not going to analyze your entire conversation. We were asked to talk about that part where the response got a little bit. There was some feelings going on. And I said that's demonstrative of both an emotional state and an attitude. If you want to talk about that later, that's fine. So if you're saying, well, when I'm calm and I'm deliberate, obviously I consider Dr. Ehrman a scholar. But when I'm a little bit annoyed and maybe feeling a little bit attacked, you refer to him as a critic. You did, and being consistent in how you talk about someone shows your temperament and your attitude towards them. So even though there's scholars I disagree with in my field and they really piss me off, I don't ever refer to them in a way that can be taken negatively. And maybe that's something you could reflect on, because I'm not going to apologize for what I said.
All right. Well, with that being said, we got a lot to go through and not a lot of time to do it. So we already get started with point number 1. Again, this is a 2-hour video. I've picked certain portions throughout it. We can't respond to the whole thing. What was that?
I said we're gonna have to blitz this stuff.
Yeah.
But just so long as I get to say everything that I want to say, we're good.
Yeah. All right. So Dr. Kill is priority 1. All right. This clip is only about a minute long. Oh, I guess I should share my fucking screen, shouldn't I? God damn it.
Yes, please.
Amateur
sir.
hour. That might be real fucking helpful. Wait, did I share the Chrome? The Chrome tab is what I'm doing. Okay. Here we go.
Are you sick of having issues with your
God
webinars,
damn.
wasting tons of
I
time?
am.
Troubleshooting attendees? If so,
How did you know?
I'm wondering if
real
are you
good.
making any money off that?
What the hell is this?
You
Where
hit
did my
fast
video
forward.
go?
You hit fast forward.
Oh.
Not.
How do I hit fast backwards? Hold
There
on a
is no
second.
fast
Let me,
Yeah.
on-
Apparently there is not.
There's an acronym we used to use in my previous profession called
Meanwhile,
your SOL, but we can discuss that later. You have to reload it.
Dr. Fry closed her
Jesus.
door to keep all the dogs out.
I'm so sorry.
Well, since you're doing that,
Welcome.
I'm gonna go take a 1 minute break.
Mhm.
Okay.
Is he going to come back with libations?
Don't know. All right. He's just gonna miss this first clip. It's okay. Okay.
When he says that the disciple who wrote these things down has identified, when you look at the passage in context, what I'm trying to say, let me pull it up. It's John 21, 20 through 24. It says, Peter saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. He was the one who reclined next to Jesus at the supper and had said, Lord, who is it that's going to betray you? Peter saw him. He said, Lord, what about him?
No,
Jesus said, it is my will for that he remain until I come. What is that to you? Follow me. So the rumor spread in the community that this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say that he would not die, but he said, it is my will that he remain until I come. What is that to you? This is the disciple who is testifying to these things and has written them. So, I mean, I guess I'm just a little confused on why this is difficult. And then when you look at
Okay. Does anybody have a take on this? Or I guess, Pat, you didn't hear any of that, did you? Dr. Fry, did you hear any of it?
Yes, I did. Sorry, my dog may have left her nighttime treat in here, and that is very upsetting. So it's a whole thing. Yeah, they
Who among us?
yeah, it's really a thing. Again, because I've been in these circles, ironically, I just said it. It's a circular argument, right?
No. The passage is saying, this is the disciple who was testifying about these things and wrote these things. How is he just identifying himself as the author or the one who's saying, like, to me, this passage is about Peter, because that entire chapter of 21 is all about Peter. Peter went fishing, then Peter talked with Jesus, then Peter this, then Peter this, then Peter this. And then it goes, this is the disciple who's testifying these things and wrote about these things. Do you read that as yeah,
I'll be honest. I haven't read the New Testament in a while. So good thing I'm here, guys. So I have I mean before I'll give Pat and Alexiana a minute here to collect their thoughts. But I wanted to say at the outset, I find this whole much of this whole discussion and conversation I find kind of silly, because the Gospels are anonymous by way of the quite technical definition of the term. They're anonymous, and it frustrates me when I hear apologists say, no, they are not anonymous because they have these attributions. That's a different thing, and I am ignoring the fact. I'm ignoring, whether or not these attributions, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, are accurate or inaccurate. You can believe they're accurate, but that doesn't satisfy the definition of what it is to be anonymous. Anonymous means to be writing outside of your own personality or identity. You're not self-identifying in the text that you're writing. And if you're not doing that, it's an anonymous text. In my mind, it's just that simple. Am I wrong?
No. So I'm just going to say that their analysis is entirely consistent with what we read in the early church fathers and church tradition. We have attributions coming up later. So I actually don't see Peter as the subject. What I see in my analysis of that particular text, and I am not a New Testament scholar. I just want to go on the record of that. I study that literature as it reflects upon the culture the Mediterranean and its effect long term. But I think the being identified as the one who loved could just as easily be attributed to John, right? Or someone who doesn't want you to know. It's purposely, the literary style is a cliffhanger. It's an inside joke. Now, that inside joke or that inside allusion can be, oh, obviously it's John, but it could just as easily be someone else putting that out there, so it can be anyone you want it to be. Mm-hmm. And if it would just as easily if a second century father had said, well, no, actually that's Andrew, we'd be having a much larger debate. But since what survives from that era, the 2nd and 3rd century, appears to be a not always agreement, but a general agreement that, well, obviously this is John. We are historically, as a historian, we're kind of stuck with that. We either address it like Dr. Kip just did, or we just look at the literature for the style and in its nature and the time it was written. It's anonymous, and it's kind of open to interpretation, but most people interpret it as being John, the son of Zebedee, right?
Can I just throw in something here?
Sure.
Yeah. I think what my main concern is, and again, just coming back to that trauma piece, is what happens if something comes out and it is explicit, right? We have an explicit author. It's not John. Oh no. Oh no. What then is lost? And I'm just then to I don't know how to phrase this properly. Why is not having traditional authorship so threatening? Because there are plenty of other books that now we have new data and we know it's not traditional authorship, right? We know apostleship was created in essence to help back up these books that we want to keep in the canon, right? And what's lost, really? If you want to believe in these books as God-breathed, God-inspired, then do it. No one's stopping you. But what's wrong with, like, what then is the loss of traditional authorship? Is that like this is the pin? This is the linchpin that then holds all of this together. I just don't think that's the case. If that's the case, then you're screwed on most of scripture. Then what do you even keep? You know what I mean? Like, if it's just these 4 books too, it's sort of like, yeah. Like,
nobody.
Why is it so threatening that it could be something else? And why is it so threatening that it could be multivocal? I want to say Stephen Boyce even mentioned that there were multiple expressions or explanations within but it's also within a certain box, right?
Right.
What if the box is broken? What if the box is broken?
Hold on, Than. Because that's the exact same shit y'all said to me. Again, it's me harsh, but I love you. You made that fire countdown that made my penis wiggle. No, for this video, he made a countdown that, like, specifically for me that he knew I would like, and I messaged him about it today. I was like, dude, that countdown made my penis wiggle. Where can I find that music he used? So, I'm shooting the shit.
I can't let my wife watch this video. Thanks.
Oh, does she know what penis is? I'm sorry.
She does not want to look at your penis.
I wasn't talking about giving a demonstration. I was just saying. Yeah. Anyway, but that's the same shit y'all said at the end of we just played. We need Christianity to be false. Like, is it fair for y'all to psychologize us like that and not expect us to fire back with the same energy?
I don't need it to be. It's going to continue to exist. But if you're gonna, if what is the baseline for that? It just seems very selective.
Yeah. I'm still in a position where I might actually prefer it to be true.
I get that. Yeah, I really do get that.
Yeah.
I deeply understand that.
And as a historian, the consequences are obvious. The effect it's had on, let's just say in the periods I study on the Mediterranean. I mean, the changes in, in culture and identity regionally and then more broadly. Like, again, to think that we're out to destroy it. No, but I'm not ascribed to the faith anymore. So I can talk about early martyred saints, some of which I've worked with their grave sites, and in a very factual manner. People believed it and they were willing to die for their faith. But my personal opinion should not, my personal faith system shouldn't bleed into that analysis. And if you're saying that the reason you're defending it is because you believe it to be true, then you've left scholarship and gone into advocacy. And that's, I think, what you're going to get a pushback from people like that.
Does anyone know what an IDR is?
I know, but you got 159,000 of them.
You got 159,000 of them.
I think it's money. I think
it's
not kind of
that
money.
Kind of money. What is that?
Also, who is
that
Frank
like pennies?
Turking?
Who is what?
Frank Turking.
Frank Turk.
Apologizing isn't a good thing to do. Honey, I'm a trauma scholar. We're all traumatized. It's sad. It's really hard.
We're doing a drinking game here, right? every time Alexiana
every time I say trauma, take a shot.
If that was sent by mistake, please let me know. You can email me, Captain Dadpool 86.
It's Indonesian. It's Indonesian, and it converts at well, I'll just do this. $1 US dollar is equal to basically 15,000 Indonesian rupiah.
Which is so
pretty
kind.
good.
So much. Thank
you very much.
That's pretty great, man.
$10, please. Okay, that's better. I feel better now.
Wow.
Okay, I saw that number freaked me out for a second. I was like, oh god, I got to figure out how to return a super chat. I don't know how to do that.
if it was euros, I'd be tempted to keep. No, I'm just kidding. USD, baby.
The next one's going to be kind of short. A lot of these are going to be shorter than this one.
Okay.
So don't feel like we're going to spend this amount of time on every part. This one's real quick.
James
Sorry.
is the beloved disciple. First of all, that's just shooting himself in the foot. If James is an eyewitness, that's a pretty good case for the Gospel of John right there. But I mean, Jesus refers to his disciples as his brothers in places like John 20:17, and the disciples are also called brothers in John 21:23. It wouldn't be weird for him to look at a disciple who he called a brother and say, "Take care of your mother."
Okay, the thing is, he didn't call him brother in that passage. He said, "This is the one whom I love. Mother, take care of your son. Son, take care." Like he didn't call him one of my brothers in the Lord. He said, like, read it. I didn't have it prepared. But he doesn't call him brother in that passage. He calls him the one who I love. So, okay, that one's quick. Hey, Greater Candle. For 2,000 years, this book of peace has never a truly single year of it. This book of God have never demonstrated one. This book of truth has multiple interpretations. What exactly is the standing point? Yeah. Is that a rhetorical question? I'm kind of guessing.
It's a really good one.
Yeah, it really is. Thank you, Greater Candle, for the super chat. By the way, if y'all got super chats, send them. I'm going to I'll address them at the end. I forgot to say that before, so I wanted to grab that one now. But yeah, if you have super chats, feel free to send them. And then I'm going to try to allot some time at the end so we can address those. Okay, so the next one is about the whole P66 gaffe, which was not a gaffe. And y'all are going to be really embarrassed about this one.
Anything else you guys want to hit on that one?
I think we can continue.
Okay.
Believe that the entire last chapter of John was a later scribal edition. This is entirely possible, as the first manuscript to record John 21 is dated around 200. And even then, notice the references. All right. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but notice I have the references on the screen there. It ends with verse 17. Of course, it's possible the end was cut off, but even still, that manuscript contains evidence of first, second, and third-hand scribal corrections. Also regarding the end of John's gospel.
Do we want to stop there? Or
Sure.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Steve.
Well, I mean that he just said it. I mean, he just said it. We don't have. It's a fragment. We don't have the whole thing.
Exactly.
You just said it. It's a fragment. We don't have it.
Do
This
you
one's a
know
two-part.
is
Let me get,
okay? You finish.
yeah, let me get to the
I
next,
guess. Eh? Okay.
yeah, let me get to the next part, and then we can.
All right.
Manuscript. Yep. And P66 actually covers verses 1 through 9, verse 12, and verse 17 in chapter 21. Unless my eyes are absolutely deceiving me.
Your ears are deceiving you.
It's fragmented. It's 1 through 9, verse 12 and verse 17. But his claim about P66 is probably
right.
wrong.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, I missed that. Yeah, you're right.
No, what I literally said was P66 was the first manuscript that has chapter 21 on it, and it's dated to the 2nd century. The first time I forget his name now, Irenaeus, that I argued said that verse 20 or chapter 20 was the end. So I didn't misquote.
Okay.
Y'all just misheard.
Did you say it's 2nd century?
P66, yeah, it's like the end of the 2nd century, I think.
So
And
that
did
would
you
be.
say-
I mean, there's only. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there's like 2 or 3.
Yeah, there's like 3, I think. This is one of them.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know that this is good evidence one way or the other. Honestly, like the manuscript. I did have a question as to whether or not it's a codex or it's a codex, right?
I got it right here.
Because this is important. Okay, so codices are harder to judge in terms of, you know, how much. And well, I would say in terms of size, like when we're reconstructing them, just because of the way that you construct a codex as opposed to like a scroll. But I would say, pardon?
Real quick on the dating, there's a list of scholars. This is my book all about the manuscripts. I just got a list of scholars that date them and how they date them. A couple of them date them between the year 1 and 150. A couple of them date them between 130 and 150. A couple of them date them around 200. And one guy dates it to 457. It's really specific. But yeah, it seems to be somewhere around it. Who can say? It's the dating is so all over the place. It's hard to like pinpoint exactly. But I think most are saying 2nd century, end of the 2nd century. Anyway, yeah, that's the dating on that one's not very straightforward.
And I think you were talking about Tertullian, right? As far as his reference to it.
Yes.
Yeah. It's Tertullian.
And Tertullian's writing when?
I get Irenaeus and Tertullian.
Towards the end of
second.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So,
yeah, keep going with what you were saying, Dr.
Did you have more to say, Pat?
I was just going to say, but what you said was that's the first occurrence, which it appears after you asked me to look into it, that appears to be consistent. I don't know why they were acting like they got you in a zip dinger.
Vacuum of evidence prior to that. So you know, if you're, and as a manuscript guy, I have a strong tendency to, you know, be, what's the word I'm looking for? Cautious with regards to how confidently we can speak about works prior to, you know, the earliest copies that we have, right? So it's one of these things where I'm kind of like, you know, if this is like your earliest copy, and it seems everyone's in agreement that this is the earliest copy containing chapter 21, you know, there's not much of an argument that you could. There's certainly not a manuscript argument that you could, or a physical argument that you can forward.
Okay, I'm back.
So, yeah, I don't know.
My internet cut out. I missed all that. I'm sure it was epic.
Oh,
it was fantastic. We actually did an ovation, but you missed it.
I missed all the good stuff.
So, no,
all right.
I
think I'm skip over a couple for the sake of time. Let's go to this one. Again, maybe I should add the goddamn. Nothing but professionalism here on Nerds and Heresy.
Bases covered.
Well, when I first saw Dadpole make this statement, I was like, I mean, Richard Bauckham has a whole section on his book where he points out that this fits right in with what Tertullian's arguing, because Tertullian says like this is like the end of the gospel. Well, Bauckham is pointing out in his book that that is the end of the main body of the gospel, and then chapter 21 is like an epilogue. 30 to 31, 21 to 24 to 25 form together a carefully composed two-stage conclusion of the gospel. This requires that written has the same sense in both 20 and 21. And Bauckham lists points to this. So he notes that John chapter 1 is like a prologue. John chapter 21 is like the epilogue. The last word in verse 23 are until I come. Contrast that with how he opens his gospel in the beginning. So you start out with going to creation, and then you have the end referring to the Parousia. Then you see also the prologue of John's gospel has 496 syllables. The epilogue has 496 words. Now, the prologue is more poetic, so it's marked by syllables, whereas the ending is not written in a poetic structure, so it's marked by words. The two-stage conclusion of this gospel, again, 20 and 21, framing the epilogue, each consists of both 43 words in verses 20, 30 to 31, and 21, 24 to 25. Okay, odd coincidence, unless you have an actual unity going on there. Okay, the first stage speaks of many other signs.
Okay.
So hold on. Am I the only one who finds these kind of arguments about counting words and syllables?
Insane. Like in what language does it make does it syllables line? Is he going to the original Greek there? Which manuscripts is he using?
It just reminds me of that video that circulates pretty regularly, which I find hilarious, where it's like Monster Energy drinks. It's bad, bad. That means
oh my god, yeah.
Like
I'm not willing.
I mean,
I'm
Michael,
not willing to die on the hill that 21 was added later. I'm not willing to die on that hill.
No,
it doesn't matter.
We also don't
But
know.
that's what
right? That's just it. We don't know.
Right.
Also,
we don't have the manuscript evidence to show one way or the other. I was going to say though, this is it's funny because this is exactly Michael Jones has made an argument like this with regards to the unity of the early materials in the book of Genesis by trying to tie chapters 1 and 2 together on the basis of the number of occurrences of Yahweh and Elohim, and he gets it wrong.
Correct.
He doesn't count them correctly. So these sorts of arguments are not convincing to anyone, you guys. It's not. Scholars don't work this way.
No.
And if anything, I can point out a couple scholars that would say that that's evidence of textual addition. The fact that someone took the time to count those syllables in the beginning and then emulate it in the back side of it to, again, it doesn't help your argument. At best, it's a neutral piece of evidence that you're interpreting positively without engaging in the critical scholarship on the other side. So if you wanted to bracket that argument saying some people say this as a confirmation of my analysis and some people say negative, then that would be, scholastically, sufficient argumentation. But again, if you're only counting the hits and ignoring the misses, you're not engaging in scholarship.
Yes. Thank you.
No.
Because I can't help myself, because you know this from last time.
Do I get
Dan
to drink
McClellan,
again?
The mention of Dan McClellan's.
Okay.
Again, you keep. Oh, yes.
Did you say it yet? Oh.
Hmm?
Did you say it yet? I'm waiting for you to say.
Waiting on the magic word.
I'll say it. Yeah. The need to only really be citing like Bauckham and Kostenberger, like once again, just betrays your ideological need. I
do have something. I wasn't going to mention it because we were short on time, but now I'm going to do it. So I looked into
skip a little bit more than
I looked into Bauckham, and I did notice, and I mentioned to Ricky, they seem to, in the course of this entire video, we're not going to go through each instance, Bauckham is brought out numerous times. And he is a scholar that deserves quite a bit level of respect. But when Bauckham wrote this book, and let's just get into my notes because I don't want to get it wrong. Now, when we talk about Bauckham, Bauckham is written a book in the mid 2000s, about 2007, 2008, that later has a revision. It's called Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. It's what he received an actual award from Michael Ramsey Prize in theology, which again, these are very prestigious awards.
Yeah,
but he got the award because in his own admission and in the acceptance of this award, it was stated, quote, his challenge to the consensus view that gospel writers were anonymous and the product community transmission and development is the reason. Like, he admitted that this work is outside consensus. Never was this mentioned. Going to Bauckham all the time is no different than other people going. I'm not saying he's fringe, because he's not fringe in scholarship. No, but this analysis is not within consensus. This is not. And so bringing out your one friend who's really smart, you know,
imagine if I talked about Richard Carrier all the time.
Right. And like, you know, Bauckham is in the same school of academic credibility and prestige as someone like Ehrman. So if you were going to bring up all the heavy hitters, so to speak,
do them all.
Make it a plethora of data, and we can compare Bauckman's work versus other people and compare their scholarship. But if you were consistently holding up one book, I have to wonder, you know, again, Dr. Fry is right.
If you've read any,
there's a theological motivation for this.
Props to Bauckham, like his Revelation commentary when I was back in the throes of deep fundamentalism. Delicious. But
my students always ask me, Pat, why do you always pitch the Oxford handbooks to start? Because you get a variety of scholarship that are heavily referenced. Don't buy one book on a subject by one author, because you're getting that author, whether they're in the consensus opinion or not, is going to be formative, particularly when you're new in scholarship. So I always tell my students, if you make the path wide, you bracket it with the consensus scholarship. And if you want to branch out after that, great.
Good for you. But know how to do scholarship before you do that.
And I have most of my books, well, not most of them, but the ones I use the most or refer to the most are above my monitors, like 3 shelves. I've probably got 6 of them or more that I can pull up that argue that the Gospels are anonymous.
Yeah.
By like 4 or 5 different authors.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm into my second beer now. I do want to say something about Dr. Boyce at this point. We're not going to get to it, but his discussion of the Johannine school, that shows that he's engaging with the scholarship. His opinion is this is a community work. Now he think again,
which I loved.
Within that scholarship, this is my compliment to him. He definitely addresses that it's probably not single scholarship, and it's probably occurring at the end of John's life where he's relying on scribes and other people. Now, within that construction, there are, again, the scholarship's divided. Some people think that Johannine community exists at the end of John's life.
Yep.
Other scholars, though, which weren't mentioned in this, were that John dies before the Johannine school forms.
Yeah.
That would be a proper reflection. Right.
Yep.
So there's the Johannine community hypothesis, which I generally agree with. Boyce deserves a lot of credit because that's not real popular among a lot of what I would call theologians. So Boyce deserves a credit for even bringing it up, but I kind of wish he would have bracketed in a larger analysis. Maybe John's not around anymore and the people are emulating him after. And emulation, by the way, emulation in a text like John would be really hard if they're the ones that originally helped him prepare the early part of the text, and then there's a process of coordinated compilation. It would go, again, some scholars say they could probably do it, but I think most scholars say the people writing the text, even if it was dictated, would be hard to deduce later detections as well as additions if it's the same community authoring it. So it's going to be a question we leave open forever, and Boyce deserves proper acknowledgement that he brought up an opinion that's credible within consensus scholarship that's outside a fundamentalist worldview of John sitting down and writing it by hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was gonna pick on Dr. Kill here because I feel like our conversation before we started on forgeries and such might be nice here.
Are we doing it here?
There's another Was this what we were talking about before? Yeah, I think we're gonna get into this.
Unless we do it when you talk about maybe another place to do it would be. Are we going to talk about when the section of the video where they talk about the Gnostic authorship?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, how about we do it there?
I didn't say anything.
I'm happy to sit quietly and listen to you guys. Talk about Richard Bauckham. That's
They've
great.
got like 2 more points, and then we'll get to that one. And these will be quick ones.
All right.
Sorry, I jumped the gun there.
This is the most New Testament I've done in like 20 years.
So I'm not even gonna play this clip. I'm just gonna kind of rehash the argument. I say there's miracles or claims of supernatural is the word I use on like every page in Acts, but there are no supernatural claims in Paul's letters. I don't use the word miracles. I say supernatural letters. There are mentions of miracles. Like somebody brought up Galatians 3:5, which is so then does he who provides you with the spirit of worked miracles among you. But they also cite 1 Corinthians, which talks about the spiritual gifts of tongues, prophesying, interpreting prophecy. I don't consider those supernatural. Tongues is not supernatural.
Depends on your definition of that. Yeah,
prophecy is not inherently supernatural. You can fake tongues. I did it. I faked tongues.
Same.
You can fake right?
Well, I don't want to have the whole glossolalia argument right now, but
come on.
We can do that later.
Is it xenolalia? Is it glossolalia? Or is it isolalia? Come on, pick one. Which one? Yeah. So I don't put those in the same category as like healing or casting out demons or things like that. I don't think those are inherently supernatural when there's such an obvious natural explanation for those things. They're faking it.
Not unless you have an interpreter.
So I think
I had a woman in my church who did this every day, every Sunday, and she interpreted her own tongues.
Oh, of course she did.
Oh wow! And I'm just looking at the chat here, Captain Deadpool, and I'm wondering like if you could maybe in a sentence or two explain what the argument was that you were making and that they were challenging on this miracle point.
So my argument was that Paul is writing his own accounts to a congregation 20, 30, 40 years earlier than Acts is written, which is claiming to be a companion of Paul, but he doesn't join Paul until like chapter 16 of Acts, if it's even him. But in like every page of Acts, there's healing, casting out demons, people being raised from the dead, Ananias and Sapphira just dying. So there's all these like crazy stories in Acts. That's only written to one person. It's not written to a congregation like Paul is writing his letters. That matters. Paul's writing to one guy, Theophilus. Might be a name, might be a title. We have no idea who he is. So Paul's own
people who love God.
That's another possibility. My favorite theory is that he was Paul's lawyer, but we won't go into that. I don't think it's the right one, but it's the most fun one to play with, I think. Anyway, so my argument is Paul is giving his own firsthand accounts earlier, and he doesn't mention any of these crazy things happening.
Yeah.
And even his own conversion stories, because in Acts, it says his conversion story 3 times, and they change each time. He has a dialogue with Jesus. He goes blind. Ananias appears to him, tells him, go heal him, and then scales fall from his eyes. And it's this whole thing. When Paul talks about his conversion multiple times, he says, Jesus was revealed to me. That's it. Nothing. No Ananias, no dialogue with Jesus. Jesus doesn't say anything to him. He doesn't go blind. There's no road to Damascus. There's not people with him to witness it. He just says he revealed him to me, or he was revealed to me. So that's not as much of a claim as what you read in Acts. So what you see is, clearly Acts is a massive embellishment.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say this all goes towards the idea that the writer of Luke Acts was not altogether that familiar with Paul.
Yeah. In particular, when Paul's defending his apostolic authority and equality with other people, he never mentions, other than Christ being revealed to him or revealing himself to him, doesn't talk about this is what he said to me in order to kind of lay credence to that, which would have been the time to do it when he was protesting his equality with those that had actually lived with Jesus. So, I mean, again, you can say argument of silence and do all that, but there is a certain amount of
it, and that's that's the response from these guys as well. We don't know. Paul doesn't have to. I think Stephen Boyce actually said at one point, Paul doesn't mention in every single letter that he's a Christian. Ergo, we must conclude that he was not a Christian by way of the same argument from silence. And I guess my response to that way of thinking, that you can fill in the gaps here of Paul's silence with stuff from the book of Acts. I'm not convinced you can, but let's say you can. This is still not something that we should accept as from an historical perspective. This is certainly not something that we should accept as a given, right? Yes, you provided us with a possibility, but I would suggest that it doesn't rise. It doesn't rise to the occasion of like blanket acceptance. So you've made a case. I just don't think it's an especially convincing one.
I forgot I made this. I'm glad I remember. So I'm going to bring it up. These are the 3 different accounts of Paul's conversion in Acts. Okay. Yellow is Jesus speaking, blue is Paul, and green is Ananias. You can see how they change. And in the 3rd account is Paul giving his own account to King Agrippa.
Yeah, wow.
And he doesn't mention Ananias. Jesus does talk to him. But then again, this is Acts and Paul's own accounts. He doesn't talk to the king, I don't think. So yeah, like you can see just by here in the book of Acts alone, the accounts are very different. That doesn't mean there's not a kernel of truth in there somewhere, but it does show there's some inconsistency in the data.
Certainly, and there's good reason to think that the author of Acts, on the basis of this data, didn't talk to Paul about this.
Yeah. Where was I?
Sorry.
I kind of wanted to hit. I'm gonna skip that one. All right, I think we do. I think this one might be a good one that we can get in some stuff.
Okay.
Oops, wrong one. Here we go. All right. Now I got to get my times right. And then after this one, we'll get into the Gnostic one.
Okay.
32, 35.
And the fact that he seems really resistant to harmonizations here. And I always just find it kind of a double standard, because we do harmonization in everyday life when we do investigations in general. We do harmonizations when we do history. But then as soon as it comes to the Gospels, because it's religion, the automatic assumption is, oh, you're just harmonizing because of your religious ideology. But it just seems like completely ridiculous to say we can harmonize over here, but as soon as you do it with the Gospels, it's bad.
All right, where do we start with that one? I feel an energy coming at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. I feel like the Holy Spirit's telling me, Dr. Kip, you got something you want to say about this?
No, I don't know. I mean, I think if the thought is that, what I hear is the critique I hear is that I, as an historian or a textual scholar, I'm not treating, I guess in this case, the Gospels. I never treat the Gospels at all. So I'm not treating the biblical text that I deal with the same measure, or I treat them with a higher level of skepticism than I treat any other contemporary literature. It feels like that's what he's saying to me and to other historians. I hate using the word atheistic or atheist scholars, because I don't, it's not like we wear badges when we go to SBL or anything. And I never ever think of my colleagues this way. I just don't. We're all just scholars, and I read the work, and I engage with the arguments, and I really like what I find convincing, and I really hate what I don't. And that's just it. And I think I there's certainly places to work through and attempt to harmonize. I don't really like that word either. I guess I would prefer to say find localized correspondences between individual accounts of the same events. But the real fact of the matter here is that's really hard to do. You know, by and large, most of the stuff that we're working with, I mean, historians, ancient historians generally aren't nearly as close enough to the events as we would like. And that creates all sorts of problems when it comes to dealing with their work. So, no, I feel like harmonization or finding these correspondences has a place, but you can't just give the benefit of the doubt to the text every time. You can't do it. If you're doing that, you're not doing history anymore.
Especially since with these texts,
and I'm talking about any text here, guys. Any text.
Yeah. The Gospels were not written with the intent of being harmonized. Each individual author is trying to tell their own story, their own depiction about Jesus, and the Gospels make a lot more sense when you put those parameters. All right, why is it in Mark, Jesus is dreading his crucifixion? He is not looking forward to it at all. Well, Matthew and Luke come around and like, let's smooth that over. So he does little things like in Mark, when he goes to pray, he asks the disciples to come with him to the Garden of Gethsemane. But in Matthew and Luke, he tells them to stay there and either pray or fall or take a nap. I can't remember which. So there's little things like that, like Mark is trying to make a depiction about Jesus as more human than divine, right? Because if he's too divine, he can't suffer. That was the idea. That's Paul's whole. I'm going off a tangent here. I wasn't trying to do. That's Paul's whole railing against the Docetists, because they believe Jesus didn't suffer at all because he was completely a spiritual being. So Mark's like, no, he's got to be at least somewhat human so that he can suffer for our sins. Matthew and Luke come along and are like, that's a little too much suffering. He's crying a little too much about this. You want him to be like kind of reluctant about it, not super happy. And then John comes around and Jesus is a fucking superhero, right? He's like, yeah, bring it, bitch. Crucify me. See if I fucking care. And Mark, he's like, please don't crucify me. I don't want to do this. It's Mark. He's like, fucking bring it. And John, he's like, fucking bring it. That's what's happening. Everyone's trying to give their own version of the Jesus story. And when you try and mash them together, you take away from the meaning of each gospel, and it becomes something that is unrecognizable at that point. You have to force these harmonizations that were never meant to be there in the first place. So you're robbing yourself of meaning when you're reading these texts.
Yes.
All right, I'm done.
Yeah, I totally
And
agree.
the only thing I want to, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Pep.
No, you go. So I have a delay. You go.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
I was just going to say harmonization. If we're actually going to jump into, there's a lot of comparative of what ancient authors did in this video. We don't have time to go into it. You could just as equally say some of the best historians that we can use as examples, because we keep hearing about how good of historical accounts these gospels are and how they're emulating the traditions of the region of the period. Well, if they're not emulating the best qualities, because some of the best surviving works we have are of historians who typically say something like, these are the 3 stories about this incident that I heard, of which I believe this one.
Yes.
And that is more standardized, and even as bad of a historian as he probably was as one of the earliest historians, Herodotus, he does it. He doesn't do it as often as he probably should, but he does it. When we're looking at historical narratives, without that complex gist back and forth and the uncertainty of certain traditions or what they would call data at that time, often it's reduced to some people here say this, some people here say that, but it is presenting 2 narratives of possible explanation. And I do think that harmonization, while people did it in the ancient world, sure they did, but did they do it in histories or did they do it in mythologies? Start comparing that. And I'm not going to tell them to take time because it's an entire field of scholarship, but it's important to look at that. And they do it and typically historians talk about mythologies differently than people that are writing mythical traditions. Historians typically talk about the multiple mythical traditions where people writing a specific mythology only include one, the one they like, the one that serves their purpose for the writing of the text that they're particularly engaged with. That aside, there's a reason Tatian's Harmonization, the Diasterion, didn't survive. Explain to me why the Harmonization of the Gospels we don't have any actual copies of. It's all in other works. But Tatian's attempt to do this doesn't survive the historical record. And we can't really talk about it.
That's an interesting point.
I think just to jump off of everyone here, because everyone's pretty much already said it. But again, from a trauma perspective,
Drink.
It's also, you're robbing yourself of the beauty of each of these time periods that each of these pieces came out of. Narratives are how communities construct their identity. They tell you stories about what mattered to them. And so, I mean, that's recur, right? Like just why? Once again, why? Why rob yourself of the beauty for what? For what?
That's a big, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. It's just.
That's why the Bible is so much more interesting of a book.
It really is.
Now
I had one of my very few encounters with the New Testament was in my MA when I was working on my thesis, and I read the Gospel of Luke very carefully. Well, it would have been the first time I'd read it very carefully, and I was reading some other stuff.
Okay,
by Sanders.
Heretical to whom?
That is the issue. Yes. No, but it's a fair question.
That is the issue. Yes,
right. And we can talk about other potential heretics as well.
Who's in power?
Right. And we're talking about the proto-Orthodox Church. I'm not comfortable calling it the Orthodox Church till the few synods before Constantinople. Before we get the Nicene Creed, the first version in 325.
They're barely calling themselves Christians.
Well, but there were a few synods, like the synods of Elvira, that occur within this, even a little earlier than Nicaea. But again, until you get into the 4th century or just the decade before, you don't have orthodoxy yet. You have a couple bottlenecks. Orthodoxy being one of the big bottlenecks, right? And we call it proto-orthodox for a reason.
All I'm saying is the harmonization. I felt I'm a scholar. I got a PhD in Old Testament because I love the disharmony and the beauty that it creates.
Yeah.
And just being. I don't have to make it anything. I don't have to force it anything. And in actuality, it brings me in as a reader to interpret alongside with it. That's beautiful. And you're missing out by having to stick inside this little rigid, I have to see inside this tiny little prism. It's so sad.
Yeah, well, I'm an archaeologist. Disharmony fucks up my context and makes me have to work really hard to explain it. That's all.
Oh. Okay.
But you still have to explain it.
The psychologizing lady does have to leave. And so I will no longer be telling these poor, sweet human creatures that there's trauma in their life and they will have to deal with it. I love you all very, very much. Please keep thinking of trauma and drink for me.
Will do.
Here we go.
Thank you for joining us again.
Bye, guys.
I feel better for having met her.
Me too,
we all should.
Yep. She has a very, very calming effect, I feel like. Maybe that's why she's so good at what she does.
Exactly.
I don't know.
No doubt.
All right. Now we're getting into the the Gnostic text.
This is the Gnostic stuff? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I will definitely have some things to say.
In fact, that's one of the things. So the literature starts changing not long after that. And one of the things that you know about the Gnostic Gospels, for example, or those that were not of the canonical Gospels, we started getting the Gospel of Peter, which I've published my own translation of. When you look at the Gospel of Thomas, look at the Gospel of Mary, they are admittedly calling themselves by their name and first person, saying that they're writing. Those should have been indicators immediately that these are faulty Gospels. These are not eyewitness reports, because they left the eyewitness strategy of writing the way that we're talking about and spent their whole Gospels in the first person, not just sections, the whole Gospels. I mean, at the very end of the Gospel of Peter, right where the fragment breaks off of the manuscript, the only manuscript we have of it, it says, I, Simon Peter, and my brother Andrew went with Levi, blank, blank. That's the end of the manuscript. Then he includes himself in the resurrection narrative when he's not even there. So he puts himself in the first person with the women at the tomb. I, Thomas, Didymus. I mean, he goes in like Mary, calling herself Mary. This isn't all the. We should be concerned when we see Gospels who don't practice that kind of thing. And it's ironic that only the canonical use that form and all the other ones use first person.
Okay.
You go first, Skip.
Yeah. So the argument here is that and it's such a strange argument to me, the anonymity of the Gospels ensures their I guess their strength as eyewitness accounts, but it also seems to the suggestion here seems to be that this also strengthens the case of their attribution. Is that what I'm hearing? Like, is that what you're hearing, Pat? Yeah. So,
yeah.
I mean, right away, we have anonymous texts from the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, which have been attributed to authors. Most famously, the books of Moses are anonymous. In particular, the first four, but have been widely considered to have been written by Moses. The books of 1st and 2nd Kings were attributed by the rabbis to Jeremiah. And this is an attribution that has, there's never been anybody else suggested as the author of these books. The book of Lamentations was also attributed to Jeremiah, and he's the only one who's ever been suggested as the author for this anonymous book. Solomon was attributed to have authored the book of Ecclesiastes. And again, nobody else has been offered as a potential author for this book. This is not a convincing argument for the case of their authenticity, nor is it a good argument for the case of this attribution, because I very much doubt that the authorship of the book of Kohelet belonging to Solomon is a hill that any of these guys want to die on. But it's the same argument. I wanted to, the other one that I wanted to talk about at this point was the book of Daniel. Because I think what we see in the book of Daniel is a classic case. That one of the other things that I think kind of frustrated me in this video is, as I was watching it, I got the sense that it seems like all four of these guys don't understand how forgery works or attribution, how these things work, especially in antiquity. Because what we see in the Gospels is actually a pattern that plays out across all sorts of ancient literature. I'm most familiar with the stuff from the Second Temple period. So the book of Daniel is an excellent case for this. Scholars for well over a century or 2 centuries now have been, pretty firmly convinced that the book of Daniel is comprised of portions. It's a compilation of Aramaic tales in the first half, and then much later Hebrew prophecies in the second half. These Aramaic tales all feature Daniel, but it is written in the third person and is technically an anonymous. These are anonymous texts. The second half, written in Hebrew, is all written in the first person, attributed directly to Daniel. And as a result, when you smash the whole thing together, the whole book kind of took on this attribution of Daniel. Daniel then becomes the author of the whole thing. But that doesn't, the construction of the book itself does not lend any weight to the idea that he actually did write any of it. At this point, I'll bring up a picture here, which I think is pretty cool.
Yes.
One of the things that
by the way, everyone in the chat who's asking questions, Assemblies of God and others, I'm saving your questions. I'm starring them, and we'll ask them at the end. I'm not ignoring y'all.
There we go. Thank you. Oh,
sorry. Okay, my bad.
There it is. All right. So I'm going to show you guys a picture here of a really, really, really cool manuscript. So this is the only 3 fragments that belong to 4Q Daniel C, 4Q 114. This is one of our 2 oldest copies of the Book of Daniel in existence. It's commonly dated to about 100 to 50 BCE, but I think 100 is probably too early. I have, you'll notice these kind of purpley boxes here. I've like arranged the fragments in how I would reconstruct the whole manuscript, right? And I've added column numbers here on the basis of the size of the fragments, on the basis of how many lines we know. I can tell how many lines were in this manuscript in the first place. It was 16 lines per column. It measured a total height of about 12 centimeters. That's pretty small. Like that's like this, right? So based on that, I'm quite confident that this was a fairly small manuscript comprising a total of 8 columns, from which we have maybe 9. It might have comprised 9 columns, but of which we have everything that's just kind of right in the middle. Here we have elements from 4 columns. So why is this manuscript important? Well, in addition to being one of our earliest, it's quite interesting because it contains text from chapters 10:5 through 11 verse 29. And the only sensible way to reconstruct this manuscript is as a complete text. It could only have accommodated, I think it's chapters 9 all the way through chapter 12. So what you have here is a complete copy of just this second half of the book of Daniel. Sorry, chapter 8 through chapter 12. Just the second half of the book of Daniel. If you wanted to suggest that this was a complete copy of the book of Daniel, you would end up with over 100 columns of text on like a tiny little thing. And the thing would measure, I actually did the calculation here once. It would measure over 14 meters. Which is just not how scrolls were constructed.
Yeah, scrolls are not that long. Wow.
Well, they can be, but they wouldn't be that long and that short.
Right.
You get it?
Oh,
like the book of like
it'd be like a roll of toilet paper.
Yeah. Well, but that's it would look like a roll of toilet paper. But that's not how scrolls were constructed in antiquity. If you were constructing something that big, you would make it taller, right? Because it's a matter of pragmatics and practicality. You're cutting these, you're cutting these skins out, you're stretching them and making parchment out of them. If you're doing something ambitious enough for a text that large, you're gonna use larger sheets, like taller and longer sheets than just these
like a roll of paper towels.
Strips. Yes, exactly. So, but I show this manuscript to make a point about the construction of the book of Daniel, the construction of biblical text more generally, and how attribution works. At once upon a time, and it wasn't that long ago either. Or at least not that long ago in terms of the period we're talking about. The book of Daniel was still floating around in these different sections, and there was a whole chunk of it that was anonymous, that was attributed to nobody. It was just stories about Daniel. But once this second half got like sewed onto it literally, then it changed the makeup of the whole text. So it's not a convincing argument. And it's one that fails to understand how this stuff works. Yes, of course, later on in the 2nd century, all these later gospels are making these grand claims to eyewitness testimony, because this is specifically where they were being where the Christian church was being challenged on the quality of the originals. Right? When the people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, the people who wrote and collected the Dead Sea Scrolls, when they wrote the Temple Scroll, they wrote it in the first person and attributed it directly to Yahweh, because it lends it authority. That's how this stuff works. But that doesn't mean that the earlier stuff can be. That doesn't mean that the earlier attributions can be taken as.
Dr. Josh beat you to it, by the way,
It
Derek.
just doesn't work. So, okay, I've ranted.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, and as someone who deals with all the literature I can from this period, and this is no shade on Dr. Boyce, invoking canonization as a metric is a theological, not a historical one.
That's true.
There are books now that if we actually conferred a canonization council, there are books currently in the canon that I believe would not make it by textual critical approaches. Canonization is a really problematic term because I'm convinced, and I think the majority of scholars that are critical in the field are convinced, there are certain books, particularly in the New Testament, that are false attributions and forgeries. I'm not, and the pastorals are some of them. If we were doing this today, those books would be gone. So saying, well, they're not canon, there's fights over canon, by the way, and it's a very, I hate to say, it's a very Protestant thing to talk about canons anyway when yours is the canon you're referring to, because there are other denominations, there are other religious traditions out there, with even in the Christian milieu, that have additional books in their canon. That canonization is not a defense to authenticity or any way an immediate dismissal of how important these texts were, particularly to early Christian communities. So
that's a great point.
That's problematic.
All right, good stuff.
So
man.
We can move on now.
Yeah, I'm gonna skip over some. I think maybe we'll only hit 30 minutes left. Maybe we'll address 2 more points and then we'll take some questions.
Okay.
Real quick. I did not say that Papias was kicked out. I said he fell out of favor with the church later on. I didn't say he was kicked out or removed or anything. Just quick clarification there. Because that's what they accused me of saying. Okay.
But we all make mistakes, right?
Yeah. No.
We'll wait on that.
Yeah. Eric's like, I'm
So he probably knew Matthew, being a tax collector, kept records, so it's likely he also understood the language.
So the only verse that claims that Luke was a physician is Colossians 4:14, which is one of the epistles that scholars don't even think was written by Paul. And if Luke was the author of Luke and Acts, why does he never mention himself being a physician? You may have heard that Luke was a companion of Paul, but he never identifies himself again as Luke.
Did you guys know that? Did you guys know that in some of Paul's epistles, he doesn't mention he's a Christian? He must not be a Christian. Yeah. He must not be a Christian because he doesn't mention he's a Christian.
And right after this, they go into talking about how Luke was a physician, so could probably write, and Matthew a tax collector. So we could talk about that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, what y'all's thoughts?
So do you want, I mean, on the physician thing, I was looking around a little bit at this. Well, I mean, one of the things that I find kind of interesting is that when I feel like when people hear this, that Luke was a physician, that, you know, they kind of imagine a modern day doctor, like a medical doctor.
Yeah.
And to be sure, like there were legitimate, you know, doctors in the Greco-Roman world who were practicing like an early form of like scientific medicine, and they worked at basically creating this whole field, this whole discipline. But I did some digging around here, and I found this is just from an abstract from an article by it's in Danish. The article's in Danish and I don't read it, but the abstract is in English. It's by Petrin Brochman, and the title is Physicians in Ancient Rome and the Attitude Towards Them. So at one point in the abstract, he notes that the Roman public were generally suspicious of physicians who worked for a fee, but the authorities welcomed the profession and allowed it to settle in Rome, as well as granted it certain privileges. The level of education differed enormously from one physician to the next, since anyone could profess to be a physician without training or possible skill or probable or proper skills. So, just the idea that Luke is a physician doesn't mean that he's Galen, right?
Exactly. I once heard
he may not even know how to read or write on that basis.
He could have been a witch doctor, or the, Palestinian equivalent too.
Captain, that's exactly the range in what we use for the term physician, both in the Greek and Roman world, varied from properly, formally trained physicians who underwent high degrees of apprenticeship before they were turned loose, and they would actually say who they apprenticed under as validation early in their careers. But it ranged from that, everything through what today would be the modern equivalent of a chiropractor, down to like a paramedic EMT, straight out to a charlatan faith healer, could all be labeled with the term physician in antiquity.
Yeah.
And it's very important to understand that you have to break down some of your modern preconceptions to analyze these ancient texts, because words don't always mean the same thing, even by modern translation standards.
Yeah.
Context really matters.
The whole thing is also kind of a moot point, because let's say whoever Luke was, he was a physician, like whoever the author of Colossians was, knew this guy Luke was a physician. Luke is not attributed to the book of Luke and Acts.
Well,
he's never identified in there.
Here's the thing, though, too, because Stephen gets into this and talks about a lot, how much the introduction to the book, Gospel.
He talks about the medical terminology, supposedly.
He talks about the medical terminology and stuff. Okay, well, how about this? How about in the 2nd century or the 3rd century, whenever these, I think it's the 2nd century, right, when the attribution started to come into favor.
Yeah.
Is it possible that somebody reading this text recognized this and thinking back, this sounds like it was written by a doctor? Luke was a doctor. It must have been written by Luke. Is that possible?
It's reasonable to consider it.
I think that's what Dr. or Bart Ehrman says, actually. He says something similar about Matthew, like there's a lot more numerical references in Matthew's
Must
gospel.
be a tax collector.
So
it's all he's thinking about, right?
Yeah.
Well, the only thing I'd like to point out is in 2017, and I've not done this since 2017, but in 2017, I undertook a pretty detailed survey of scholarship on the Pauline epistles' authenticity. So as of 2017, I can tell you that the pastorals are in that group that the overwhelming majority reject as Pauline. They're forgeries. There's reasons. The two that they're talking about now, 2 Thessalonians and Colossians are in that gray area, but it's not. And all it is contested. There's different explanations for why they should be and should not be included as Pauline, as genuine Pauline articles. But so just throwing Colossians out could raise an argument of, well, there's reasons we should consider including it, reasons we shouldn't consider including it, but that has to be framed in your analysis as well. Like, we generally say there's 7, no one talks about Hebrews because Origen settled for that for us already, that argument. But the important thing to remember is out of the 13 that we generally talk about, there are 3 that are definitely out, 2 that are maybes, right? So and 1 that should never have been even considered.
So they talk about that. Maybe we can preempt that. Like they talk about this at this point. I don't know if you plan on playing the clip, but at one point they talk about this survey that was undertaken by the British New Testament Society. They where everyone was polled regarding the authorship of all the Pauline epistles, and I'm just going to share my screen again.
This is not that good.
What's not that good?
No, this I like this.
So here's the data, right? So and it was by Paul Foster who was writing a paper about the authorship of Second Thessalonians. So you can see like there's strong consensus with regards to the usual suspects: Romans, First and Second Corinthians, cool. Galatians, Philemon, First Thessalonians, and why is Philemon or Philippians and Philemon, right? And then you've got a range of opinions about everything else. And they talk about this chart as if, one of the reasons they bring this out is because it looks like there's quite a high return for scholars who think that Colossians was written by Paul, right? And I think that's part of this is to bolster this idea that Paul knew what he was talking about, and we should trust what Colossians has to say about Luke because, it must have been written by Paul. This was Testify made a video about the authorship of the pastorals, and Dan McClellan. It was a response video to one that Dan McClellan did, and he was pretty active in the comments, and he mentioned, some of the background of this chart, which is here on the Evangelical Textual Criticism blog. This survey was not rigorously scientific. Only those who felt inclined to return their forms. So everybody was handed out forms, and they, marked which epistles they thought were Pauline and which were not, and then handed them in. The estimate is that approximately 70% of the audience participated, and that there was 109 respondents. So that's probably 109 out of a total of 140, right? 130 people in attendance. So, I just wanted to say that this survey, it tells us something about what a cross section of the British New Testament Society had to say regarding the authorship of Paul, but then again, also doesn't really tell us anything at all because it's a problematic survey.
And it's not just problematic. The participants weren't vetted for any level of scholarship.
We have no idea who these people were. You don't have to be a PhD
to attend a conference,
working scholar to attend a conference. Lots
Correct.
of these could have just been students, right?
And it could have just as easily have been. Again, if you're conducting a survey like this, one of the things you want to do is, guard, although you can't always prevent inherent bias that would be from a theological perspective, right? If someone was saying these gospels have to be written by Paul or my worldview immediately deconstructs, they shouldn't be surveyed, right? That would be there wouldn't be a critical survey. And that's part of the reason this critique, the survey has been so heavily critiqued. But even then, looking at this, the sampling, defending the Paulines becomes really problematic because if you notice, if we took off the people that let's just say that of percentage, 5%, 10%, 15 or 20%, if there is a marked number of people that are, regardless of the field, are going to say they're all Paul's because they have a faith attestation, you can just reject those off the top. And and people may say, well, Pat, you're being crass. No, that's not how textual criticism and evaluations like this work. And if you've noticed something really interesting, if you go to that, there seems to be on the pastorals, 25%, 1 in 4 people, almost across the board, are making a determination on the pastorals. I'm not saying that it's 25% of the people probably have a marked level, but it is suggestive that at least a portion of the respondents were going to give an answer regardless of where the field's at in its evaluation and made no independent determination. They made a faith attestation, which again invalidates the study.
Yeah, it does.
All right. This clip's about 2.5 minutes long.
Which one is this?
This is the one about the Jewish education system.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
This is all you, bro.
Yeah, so it's one of the longer ones. So
Okay.
we'll try to end with this one, then maybe we'll pick up some questions before we wrap things up.
All right.
God damn it, I did it again.
That others did not. So there's 3 forms of schooling in Israel. You have the Bet Sefer, the Bet Talmud, and the Bet Midrash. And it's believed that even guys and girls were educated in the Bet Sefer, which you would have memorized from the age of about 3, 4, 5 up to 12. You'd have memorized the Torah by song. You would have memorized it by heart. If you were good enough and you didn't want to stop educating yourself, you would go to the Talmud, the Bet Talmud, and then you would learn the Tanakh. And then if you're really good enough, you would get trained in the synagogues outside of your local town. And if you were able to answer all the difficult questions of Torah and Tanakh, you would go out on a road, you would find a rabbi, you would chase that rabbi down, you would start dressing like him, you'd start sleeping in the same place as him, you would start changing your verbiage to his verbiage, and you would train, and that rabbi would ask you questions from your training, both in the Talmud and the Sefer. If he accepted you, then you were his disciple. Jesus flipped the whole system. He took a bunch of fishermen, tax collectors, assassins like Simon the Zealot, and he puts them on his team, calls them to be disciples, and they didn't go through the schooling program. Matthew may have. He would have been probably more educated than a tax collector, but the rest of these guys were fishermen, so they would have been educated through Sefer up to 12, and then they would have started in family businesses, like either carpentry or going into fishing, whatever it may be. And so they would have been educated not to the level Paul was. Paul would have gone through all 3 systems. So he'd have been very, very educated. That's why he was a disciple, and it mentions Gamaliel being his leader. That would have been the guy he was trained under. He went through all 3 phases. Peter, John, the rest, they would have been partially or mostly literate, enough to be similar to what a middle schooler probably would be today. They wouldn't have been the most prestigious writers out there. They were, but also Koine Greek was a trade language. I mean, this is how they did trade with other people. It was a common language to talk to other people that were bringing in transportation or purchasing things or selling things. So again, what they were talking about in Acts is these men did not go through our education program. So they concluded they went through Jesus's, which bypassed all these different things, and their rabbi was Jesus. That was the point of Acts. It had nothing to do with the fact that they were just dumb, didn't even know how to write the letter Aleph.
So just to set this up here, the point that Stephen is making is trying to counter this idea that the disciples and that Jesus were all illiterate. I mean, in the book of Acts, the passage there in the book of Acts, the Jewish Sanhedrin complains that they are literally unlettered, right? They can't read, according to the Sanhedrin. And Stephen is attempting to counter this by suggesting that there's this phenomenal public education program operational in Palestine in the 1st century. So I have to say, I don't know. Did you have anything that you wanted to say about this before I go on? Captain Dadpool or
the I don't know. Yeah, my only thinking is the whole Jesus turned the system in on itself or upside down, or whatever phrasing he used is, and I don't know if you'll repeat this, so sorry if I steal some of your thunder, but
nope, I don't have anything about that, so go ahead.
Isn't it weird that Jesus could not get disciples through their traditional means? So instead he scooped up these random people. So when I was in church, this was a sermon I'd hear from time to time. What faith they had, these disciples, that they would go, they would abandon their trade and everything and follow him, and that's how much faith they had in him. And the reality is no. The idea of being scooped up by a rabbi was like winning the lottery to them. They would be like, yeah, of course they would. I didn't even have to go through that. I didn't have to go to college, and you're going to give me a PhD? Yeah, I'll fuck my fishing business. Yeah, that's what Do you think maybe that's more likely what's going on there, and that's why the disciples couldn't read and write? Because Jesus has these fresh, smooth-brained people. I don't mean to be, however I'm being right now, and he could just download whatever he wants onto their brain. He doesn't. He can't pick out the people who are educated in the Jewish, who've made it through the Jewish education system, and he can tell them whatever he wants.
He can't pick out whoever he wants from among the Jewish educated because he's in Galilee.
Cool. Yeah, there is that.
And he's surrounded by a bunch of hay seeds. Seriously, like or turnip seeds. I don't know. Whatever derogatory term you want to apply to people who are of the farming and the agricultural trade is fine with me. So Jewish education, what is Stephen talking about here? And that was my first question when I heard this, because I'm like, wow, this is not something that I know. It's certainly not something that you find anywhere in any biblical text. My first instinct was, this sounds rabbinic. And I just looking around on the internet, because I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of rabbinic literature. Digging around on the internet, it looked like, so I heard some claims from Christian websites that this was from the Mishnah. And just to give you a primer here at the start as to how rabbinic literature works, because I feel like lots of people don't get this. So in addition to the Torah and the prophets and what's called the writings, or the other texts, including Psalms and Proverbs and the Hebrew Bible, essentially, there is a whole body of literature that the Jews have been collecting for hundreds of years, called rabbinic literature, and is divided into a number of subcategories: the Mishnah, the Tosefta, the Talmuds, the Midrashim, the sayings of the fathers. These are individual groups of writings, and the collection is vast. It's enormous. But what is it? The basic structure to understand this is like in these levels, and these levels correspond to periods of time. So the first level is the Mishnah, which is basically the collected sayings of the sages. These are supposedly oral teachings, so not written down, that were delivered by the rabbis, the sages, starting from around the beginning of the 1st century CE, all the way through to the end of the 2nd century. So right around 220 CE, and we call this group the Tanaim. Then there's a second group starting from about 220 and going all the way up to 470 CE. These are the Amorim. And their teachings basically comprise what's called the Talmudim, the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud. And the Talmud is an exhaustive commentary now on the Mishnah. So you've got the Mishnah as this layer of teachings of the rabbis. Then you've got another layer, which is all this exhaustive commentary on what's in the Mishnah now. Then after that, you've got these other less significant, less important collections, like the Midrashim, which comprise stories. They comprise other additional supplemental sayings. So what Stephen is getting at is a tractate from a text called Pirkei Avot, which is literally the tractate of the fathers. Pirkei Avot is a part of the Mishnah. It's the second last section of the Mishnah, but the Pirkei Avot is that, plus it's got a bunch of stuff appended to the end of it. This little body of literature is difficult to date. It's traditionally thought to have been written down at about 250 CE, but even the very conservative scholar Jacob Neusner said that this is a mere guess. It first appears in the Kaufman Codex, which is 10th or 11th century CE. So right away, you're dealing with a very, very late collection of literature. And the tractate itself, I'll read it to you. It's short and it's kind of neat. This is attributed to Rabbi Shmuel HaKatan, who lived around 130 CE. But again, we have no idea. It's not directly attributed to him. This is just what later rabbis guessed. They thought this is something that he said. So the tractate is Pikrei Avot 521. And here it goes. At 5 years, scripture or reading. At 10, Mishnah. At 13, commandments. At 15, Talmud. At 18, the chamber or the bridal chamber, means you get married at that time. At 20, for pursuit. That's like the pursuit of your livelihood, your trade. At 30, strength. At 40, wisdom. At 50, for counsel of others. At 60, old age. At 70, venerability. At 80, this is the age of strength. And I think that means basically it's like you're the most ultimate smart guy ever by the time you've reached 80, right? At 90, a bent body. And this is the best. At 100, as good as dead, passed on forever. That's it.
As good as
That's
dead.
the whole thing. And on the basis of this, it's suggested that this alludes to this rather intricate, organized system of education. And it doesn't. It really doesn't. I don't doubt that at some point in time, this was used maybe to construct this system of education with the Sofer, the Mishnah, and the Talmud, or the Talmud. But this is not something that you can trace all the way back to the 1st century. In fact, this is quite the opposite. David Carr has written about literacy in first century Jewish Palestine, but the definitive work has been done by Catherine Hedger, and then later by Michael White. You've heard this name, right?
Yeah, Catherine Hedger. Yeah,
yeah.
She puts like 5% or
around that. Yeah.
5 to
So
7.
I'll go through a little bit of this here. So the approach of Hedger and then later Michael Wise, he wrote about this too in 2016. So their approach was to carefully review contemporary descriptions and reports of reading and writing in Jewish Palestine from like the 1st century BC all the way through the Bar Kokhba period, which is like the middle of the 2nd century CE. So they're reviewing contemporary descriptions and reports of reading and writing, and they're juxtaposing these with the documentary evidence. There's documentary text. These are letters. These are bills of sale. These are osterka, which are potsherds upon which people would write things just for, in the common everyday, day-to-day life stuff, right? And they're looking through this for evidence of reading and writing and comparing this data then to what we know about reading and writing throughout the early Roman Empire, to which I'm sure Pat can attest was not spectacular. Literacy was not phenomenal throughout the Roman Empire. So here's a direct quote from Hedger's work. She says that although the exact literacy rate among ancient Jews cannot be determined, Mir Bar Ilan's suggestion that the Jewish literacy rate must have been lower than the literacy rate amongst Romans in the 1st century CE seems very plausible. Whether the average literacy rate among Palestinian Jews was only 3%, which was Bar Ilan's suggestion, or slightly higher, must ultimately remain open. The question naturally depends on what one understands as literacy. If literacy is determined as the ability to read documents, letters, and simple literary texts in at least one language, and to write more than one signature oneself, it is quite reasonable to assume that the Jewish literacy rate was well below 10 to 15% of the entire population, including women, which Harris has estimated for Roman society in imperial times. But if by literacy we mean the ability to read a few words and sentences and to write one's own signature only, Jews probably came closer then to the Roman average rate, whereas exact numbers can neither be verified nor falsified and are therefore of little historical value. For the following reasons, the average Jewish literacy rate, to whatever degree, must be considered to have been lower than the average Roman rate. And here's some of the reasons for this. First, Palestinian was largely agrarian and rural, lacking the infrastructure and the needs for formal literacy. Second, the Jewish education system was not widespread and focused rather exclusively on training boys, no girls, for Torah reading in the synagogues. Third, centralization of the importance of the Torah seems to have resulted in an extreme underappreciation for other types of literature. Fourth, there were no Jewish public libraries. Synagogues possessed and maintained Torah scrolls, but these were not readily available to the public for study or for reading.
Mm-hmm.
Fifth, Jewish cultural and social elites appear to have been less likely to have been able to write even their own names. No evidence whatsoever that there was any social stigma attached to illiteracy within Judea.
Yeah.
Sixth, the Roman bureaucratic apparatus, which would have required more extensive literacy, was actually, it's called by Hedger, crude and limited, resulting in far fewer scribes in Roman Palestine. So the point here is, oh, and the other one too, I forgot to mention, is that there's almost no graffiti in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Not anywhere.
I
Right?
didn't know about that. Yeah. Huh.
So, I mean, we find graffiti all over the Roman Empire. It's all over the place.
Yep.
There's almost none in Jerusalem or in other archaeological sites in and around Jewish Palestine. And this is an indication of how common people read and wrote, which is to say that they didn't.
Right.
So I mean, right away, I had to flag this, because the reason people think that the disciples of Jesus, and I would say Jesus himself, did not read or write is because so few people in Palestine in the period did. And we're pretty confident of this on the basis of, this litany of data that I've just expounded here.
Yeah. And I just want to point out again, I'm not trying to appeal to authority, but Hesser is a leading scholar in this field. She's the editor of the Oxford Handbook on Jewish life in Roman Palestine. She specifically wrote the sections on literacy, right? So and she's recognized broadly.
This is the standard work.
Right.
Hedger's book is the standard, and it's huge. Like, it's over 500 pages.
Right.
It is the standard work on literacy in Roman Palestine.
Because I've read it, I will tell you that she does make an allowance for an appearance of literacy that may be false. It's a pseudo literacy because of the mandate of rote memorization. But she also notes that this was also common among Greeks. Many Greeks that were functionally literate could recite tractates of various texts, sections of Herodotus. For example, what we talk about, the Aesop's fables or tales. Those were often memorized as young men. And so this ability to read the Torah that is later projected as a vast literacy campaign, in likelihood, the word read should be most often be repeat or recite. And it is a rote method. And the reason Romans are more literate, there is an important apex in this research as well. Romans tended to be, and I'm going to say anybody that was part of the Roman state, but many people in the provinces gained literacy through participation in the government system, i.e. bureaucratic work or the military, which was the largest single institution. An uneducated person from a rural area could join the Roman auxiliaries. Part of being an auxiliary was learning a little bit of Latin so you could communicate with the officer corps of the regular legions. So over the course of a military enlistment, there is some evidence to show that illiterate people became to that first window of just functionally, I call it functionally literate in a functionally illiterate, right? They can read a few words. They can write their own name in Latin or another language, Greek, right? If they're serving in the East in particularly. So again, this is scholarship that's not contested. And to say there's this vast tradition isn't, and I hate to say it because I appreciate everything a lot of what Boyce said during this video. And I think he's a credible scholar. This does not hit the mark. And in my opinion, isn't scholarship as much as it is an apologetic.
Yeah. Yeah, and I honestly, I just think he doesn't. This is one of these things that I honestly, it's one of these things that people just don't know,
right?
Unless you're like really embedded within, the literature and the period and the scholarship. Most people haven't heard of Hedger. I'm pretty impressed, actually, Ricky, that you have. So, yeah. So, the idea that these fishermen from Galilee were writing gospels is patently ridiculous. It really is.
In case anybody wants to suggest that.
Oh, and trade languages real quick. Again,
Mm-hmm.
in the region, you have to make one of two allowances. Either Jesus and his followers in Galilee were heavily Hellenized, or they weren't. If they weren't part of these communities that were living side and side, hanging out with their Greek contemporaries, they didn't engage in a trade language with the Greeks. They would have spoke Aramaic, and they probably would have spoke proficient Aramaic. And again, if they did memorize Hebrew, their Hebrew that they understood wasn't their communicative language of choice.
Not at all.
It was like your high schooler after 3 years of Spanish who can go to the restaurant, order things. And to people outside that community, they speak Hebrew. But inside that community, Aramaic is their language of choice. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that particularly closed Jewish communities that weren't, again, engaging in Hellenization avoided Greek, by the way. For example, part of the reason I have issues with Paul writing in Greek and Paul in general, I think Paul's Hellenization, the fact he can write in Greek, is a indicator of how not ethnically rigid he was. He's not this mainstream Palestinian Jewish guy.
The Jew of Jews, the Hebrew.
He is the very Greek friend, very Jewish friend of a bunch of Greek people. And that's an important consideration as well.
Maybe this is a bit of an aside, but for people who don't know, like, the Hebrew language effectively disappeared, pretty much with the destruction of the Second Temple. It survived only in synagogues for like hundreds and hundreds of years. Modern Hebrew is a language that was reconstructed in the late 19th, early 20th century, as a matter of fact. Yes. This was part of the program of getting European Jews back into Palestine, into Judea. Was basically the invention of a language, which is why modern Hebrew is quite different from classical Hebrew, but also, was constructed out of.
Kip's muted.
You're muted.
You're muted, Kip. Nope. He's probably
just
start all over.
Modern Hebrew was constructed out of these, out of some of these earlier forms, which is why it's quite different.
And I think that's important to note too. And Michael 119 Castro, that again, I'm not going to take up too much time. This part of the reasons Paul protests the Pharisee of Pharisees is he's making a defense because of accusations regarding his Hellenization. Again, this is we can do Paul later, but
yeah. And in case anybody wants to come and say, maybe the disciples learned Greek after Jesus left. That wasn't a thing. There were no schools that you would go to learn another language. You maybe could hire a tutor, but that was insanely expensive. These people were pretty much homeless. They were living together in each other's houses, and they were trying to stay hidden for the most part.
I would be even willing to entertain the suggestion that a few early God-fearing converts to Christianity from outside the community, for example, God-fearing Greeks that were native speaking Greeks may have taught some of these early Christians who were, only spoke Hebrew or Aramaic. I'm willing to entertain that, but that's not the argument that was offered in the video, right? There was the argument is there's this very structured system, literacy. Again, it's an argument that I think fails rigorous academic review.
It really does.
All
Sorry,
right.
Stephen, but I'll send you Catherine Hedger's book when we're done here.
Yeah.
Do you have it? Can you send it to me?
Yeah, for sure. I
God,
can.
please.
I have a PDF version of it.
Oh
so it's phenomenal. So,
it's not even my birthday.
She's and by the way, she writes where you can actually read her stuff and it's easy to read.
Yeah,
it's not like nails on a chalkboard. She's actually a really good writer.
So dumb. I'm so
no. The quality of her writing, it's not
serious.
laborious to get through. Yeah.
Some scholarly material is more difficult. I got to read it a little bit slower.
Yep.
So
well, what's the next one?
I appreciate that. I figured we can end that there. There's some questions in the chat.
Yeah.
Unless there was something else specific you wanted to address. If you still have the list.
I did want to make a comment about your issues involving Acts. And I just want I put a little comment, make sure you say this. Yeah. Criticisms of what could be seen as potential inconsistencies between these various accounts should not be simply hand waved. If we want to engage in quality discussion, simply saying, well, he's wrong, or that doesn't make any engage the argument.
Are you saying I did that?
No. They did towards your analysis of Acts, which we discussed a little earlier. But I want to make comment, like, if it appears that I've done that tonight, I apologize. But the truth is, it would probably be sometime in the future. I'd be more than happy to sit down. I'm sure Kip would as well. Talk to Stephen about some of these issues. Totally. He seems to be a talented guy and a very knowledgeable guy. He definitely deserves his PhD. But that maybe not something we do on YouTube. I mean, he lives here in Seattle, or I think he lives in Seattle.
No, sadly, he does not.
Oh, okay. Too bad.
Although, yeah, as far as I know, he doesn't.
Okay, and I mean, if we're localized, we can do that. But I this is a great discussion. I had a lot of fun tonight, and I just want to say that before we go, in case I get disconnected. I as far as his scholarship is concerned, I really, other than that last little critique about literacy, I found a lot of what he said to be credible, and I appreciate him being.
Yeah.
He's probably the ones that would challenge my thinking the most. I don't know.
Well, I will say one other thing about that video that I mean, when Stephen talked about his reconstruction of the Gospel of Matthew, I gotta admit I was pretty intrigued in the way that he was attempting to feather the Mark portions in with the uniquely Matthew and Q portions. I was like, oh, interesting.
Yeah. Well, and I would, the only other thing I would say is for everybody that was watching their video, I would challenge you, because we don't have time, because Kip knows I have about 4 pages of notes on this. I would challenge you to go in and read Eusebius's attestation of the early church fathers on what they believe the books are and why they're canonical. And in particular, read Clement of Alexandria's, his Eusebius analysis, or his relaying, he's repeating it, he's quoting it in his own work, about John's reason that, again, Clement gives for why John wrote a gospel. I just suggest they do that, because we don't have time to get into all of it. But John's gospel was in response to the other 3 gospels, not in accordance with it.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point actually to make overall here. Is the reason we have 4 gospels is not a triumph of the consistency and the reliability of the story. The reason we have 4 Gospels is because 3 later writers had such massive problems with what came before them.
Right. And in particular, again, a fair reading of Eusebius's account is John was only motivated, if again he's attributing it to John. We had that debate earlier, but again, only at least one early church father who was supposedly knowledgeable on this states that John's gospel was in response to the other 3, which would have been Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and that they lacked a spiritual gospel, that their books were mundane, and that he only wrote his gospel because there's lacked the spiritual element that necessitated him writing a gospel. Otherwise, he would have remained only with an oral tradition as he had done up to that point. Again, that's not a win for apologetics. Yeah. John was motivated by them not getting it as right as they could and straying from the spiritual nature of the text.
Yeah. I actually say that in that video that John comes along and makes a lot of corrections that the synoptics, in regards to like geography and Sabbath practices and burial rituals, he comes along and fixes all of them. And the other thing about John's gospel is in Jesus in John's gospel is all about himself. He talks about himself constantly. And the synoptics, he's all about the kingdom of God. Like, look at this. Like everything he says is pretty much about the kingdom of God in the synoptics. And John, I am that I am. I am. I and the Father are one. Me. Like Jesus talks about himself. That's why it's so different from, or what Jesus says specifically is so different from what Jesus says in the synoptics, because I guess Jesus didn't talk about himself very much in those ones, and the author John was like, yeah, he needs to brag on himself a little bit more. Yeah. It's really interesting. I'd love to know more about his motivation for that. But anyway,
super chats, questions.
Yeah,
sure.
A few quick questions. Is the birth narrative different between Matthew and Luke a Christian gut?
Yes.
I kind of think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And oh my God, I could talk about this all day.
I know.
Because Luke's gospel has Jesus being born of a cursed lineage. Anyway.
Oh, what's this? The cursed lineage.
Yeah, in there's a guy named Jehoiakim, I think. He's cursed by God, and he's removed from the line of David, and it's given to his brother. And it literally says, like, you will never have a child on the throne again. That's what God says, like, I think through Isaiah or Jeremiah. And somehow Luke says, yeah, Jesus
Jeremiah hated that guy.
Came from that guy. Like, what on earth is happening here?
I would just say, if I was going to say where Matthew was written to, it was written in Egypt. I think Matthew's gospel would, if I was sitting in Alexandria and I was a somewhat mildly Hellenized Jew, and I was trying to make the greatest epic of Jesus, it'd be just like, the 10 Commandments, man, because that's how Matthew reads.
That's pretty great.
It was, dude.
It might be my favorite, actually.
He escapes death. Herod the Great can't kill him. I mean, it was just short of putting him in a boat, but I think Matthew goes, we can't make it actually putting him in the river and sending him to Egypt. That would be too much.
So is it just me? I hear a lot of Christian apologists and Christian scholars talk about how much they love Luke. And I'm like, I don't know.
I think I've heard more say that they like Mark. Mark seems to be the
which is funny. That's crazy to me in many ways.
It's the most emotional gospel. Like, it's the most
Mark.
Yeah, it's the one that, because it like draws you in a little bit more.
Yeah,
like I was saying, the rant I went on earlier. Like, Jesus is very human. He's mourning. He's suffering. He's anxious. He's crying. Yeah. And the other gospels, he's like, this isn't that big of a deal. Well, so it's less interesting.
Mark's Jesus is a morally upright Heracles. I'm being serious.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
How do the Gospels end up in Nag Hammadi? Oh, this is I might not even. I might have skipped over this one.
I don't know. Do you know anything about the Nag Hammadi stuff?
So, again, there's quite a bit of scholarship on this, and these appear to have been. Again, we can. I don't want to get into this, but when we look at just the centers of early Christianity in the 2nd century, right, and we look at like church fathers and whose writings survived, many of them are either in that very eastern part of the Mediterranean from, mid Turkey along the coast down, but a heavy concentration of them are in Egypt. Alexandria is just kind of one of the spots. When we look at where these many texts were being preserved, I think written, the issue being that that's where they're going to be preserved as well. And it appears that one of the centers for Gnostic texts, the making of these things, the creation, was in Egypt as well and other places. But where the texts are being written, most likely the copies survive. It also shows where the church knew it needed to get rid of literature when it was time to narrow, and when certain theologies were declared heretical, they knew where to look for these texts as well. And that's the reason they're ending up in the deserts in Egypt. And yes, they could have been cached in many other places, and we just don't have those papyri and codices that survive. But there are many places outside Egypt where it could have survived as well. That it's not a perfect argument saying, well, the desert's dry and it lasts forever. There's other places these texts could have been stored as well.
Yeah.
Like, for example, Rome, for example, in the catacombs.
Right. Maybe this is a good place to just mention that phenomenal community post by Camille Gregor yesterday.
Oh yeah.
Where he made the map of the map where he tracked, or is it every place? It's like every place that's mentioned, I think, in the New Testament, and then every place where gospel manuscripts were discovered from the first 2 or 3 centuries, I think, right?
Yep. Well, pulling it up now.
Pretty revealing.
Yeah, I found that enjoyable. I actually drilled down, did a parallel with the early church fathers where they were located.
Oh, really, eh?
In the 2nd century, yeah, because you sent me down rabbit holes.
There.
Sorry, man. Yeah, there it is.
Mm-hmm.
So can you read it, Captain Dadpool? The yellow is what? Gospel manuscript discoveries.
So here's a little map first for perspective. Click to enlarge. It shows all the current countries with which locations mentioned in the Bible, and then all locations where manuscripts of the canonical Gospels were found, dated prior to 300. So yeah, there are some 34 early manuscripts, mostly small fragments, and they all come from like 5 places, all in Egypt, and almost all of them come from a single town.
Oxyrhynchus.
That's what I was about to say. Yeah.
Just like that. It was.
Just like that. It's important to keep in mind that for the first couple of centuries, we are looking through an incredibly small keyhole. So how does this square with Christian apologists bragging about how all the extant gospels manuscripts have the same titles everywhere throughout the Roman Empire? Well, for the first about 250 years, we only have manuscripts titles from Egypt. So realistically, we don't really know how they were called, say, in Britain or Spain. To get any geographic variables, we need to push the time scale all the way back to the 4th century. Sinaiticus and Vaticanus were probably written in Caesarea and Palestine. Only the late 4th century, we get Codex Bezae and Syria. Meanwhile, the most widely accepted competing hypothesis posits that the titles originate in mid-2nd century. After that, the information had some 200 years to spread to literally everywhere other than Egypt. Oh, wow. How could this have possibly happened? There's no way to explain it. I love how it goes back and forth from like scholarly to like sarcastic as fuck, like so seamlessly.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you guys aren't familiar with what Camille is doing, he's pretty great.
He's good people. I just
Yeah.
learned about him.
Yeah, Camille Gregor is he's a graduate student in classics in Prague. I thought of him actually for this panel, but because he's in Prague,
Yeah.
he's like sleeping,
Is
right?
that in Peru, right?
No, Prague is in the Czech Republic or
Czech.
Czechia. I think they call it Czechia now.
Do they?
I don't know.
I'm not up to. I didn't get that memo.
No, you didn't. You
All right.
didn't. No, I think
Super
most people
chats.
didn't. All right.
Super chats.
Yeah.
Let's do one more, and then we'll
No, we can do. Yeah.
Or actually, hold on.
I'm good.
I missed.
They're coming in.
I'm about to say, yeah, I'm way behind. Yeah, I'm gonna. Hey, J Mike. Yeah, I'm gonna do this one because I'm starting to fall asleep. So we'll end. Unless y'all are good, I can push through. But
I'm
I
good.
didn't.
I mean, Pat and I are out here on the West Coast, so it's.
Oh, that's
early.
right. Oh well, then fuck me. Then I'm fine. I'll live.
And tomorrow's a holiday.
For you.
Yeah, my kids have a 4-day weekend. Don't remind me.
I got an 8 a.m.
I was excited to send
meeting
them tomorrow
because it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon in the UK.
Of course it is. Yeah.
Can you guys explain the Dead Sea Scrolls? Are they real? Why are scientists saying they are forgery? Oh, Jesus.
Okay, so the scientists are not saying they're forgery. Scientists have concluded that about 70 of these small fragments that were sold on private antiquities markets between 1996 and 2014 are forgeries. The Dead Sea Scrolls comprises a collection of some 1,000 manuscripts that were discovered between 1947 and 1960 in roughly 11 caves nearby the site of Qumran, as well as sites up and down the western shore of the Dead Sea, like at Murabbat and Nakhokheva and Matzara. And these manuscripts, the ones that were discovered in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, these are all genuine. And we know this because a number of the fragments were actually discovered by archaeologists in situ in the caves, and they were matched with manuscript fragments that were being carted in by the Bedouin. They've been carbon dated, and yeah. So there you go. Not forgeries.
That did not take nearly as long as I thought it would.
But I will tell you, if anybody could find me a pretty unwritten piece of 2nd century BC papyri, we can make some money.
Maybe if they're maybe you
I
find
have
like
no comment.
Maybe we could find like a mask that's made of like paper mache, like put them in some kind of solution, and maybe peel. We'll find some that way. I hear that's a good way to do it.
Okay, did you guys ever see this? Sorry, Craig Evans actually did it when he was back at Acadia. This was like in 2013 or 14. He actually did this ridiculous video where he pretended to find a paper mache mask in his office. Did you ever see this?
Oh, I don't know if I saw that.
I didn't see it.
It's so weird. Sorry.
Was he like? Was it like acting? Like
yes.
Oh,
I found this papyrus in my mummy mask.
It just happens to be.
Did you see it?
No.
Oh man, I gotta look for it again because it's so funny.
Yeah, if it's on YouTube, send me the link or something.
Yeah.
Slightly off topic. Do you guys do anything about music in the 1st century Judea? Yes. Good. No.
Nope.
Sorry, Jimothy.
I believe if you're really interested, Jiminy, there's I think University of York has someone that does that, so you might want to look it up. Music and antiquity is an actual field of study for some poor smuck.
Do you think that the narrative of an innocent savior king was prevalent in Greek mythology? That's why Jesus could not read or write, and Islam copied it. Islam copied a more docetic Gnostic idea of Jesus. There's a text. What's said about Jesus in the Quran is in a book called the Second Treatise of the Great Seth. It's a 2nd century text. It says the same thing. And in Islam, they don't believe Jesus was actually crucified. In this book, and another Gnostic text, his name escapes me at the moment, Jesus actually replaces himself with Simon, who carried the cross for him. But he made Simon look like him and put him up on the cross, and Jesus literally laughs at him while he's being crucified. In Islam, they say the text says Jesus only appeared to be crucified. So they have all their own little debates about what that actually means. But he was not actually crucified.
So savior kings in Greek mythology, you're in my wheelhouse now.
Yeah.
One issue in Greek mythology and Roman mythology that we can talk about is often these semi-divine, anybody who's born of, often males born of a god. One thing they typically don't know is about their divinity till they reach adolescence or adulthood. Romulus, Heracles, like people can tell that they're godlings, but they themselves don't know about the attribution, right? There's a process of revealing them. Coming from very humble origins is also a common motif, but it's not ubiquitous. There are exceptions. Some of them are born into great households, but still they don't know that they are the divine offspring. Like the queen, for example, in case they come from a royal lineage, dad doesn't know that of his two sons, right? That one is non-miraculous and the other is, because typically they look alike too, which is kind of interesting, even though one's a godling, the other isn't, like Heracles and Epicles, for example, right? They look alike, but one is the divine son. These are the kind of things that are common motifs. So humble origin is very common, but not ubiquitous. But this idea of later revelation is, and I think depending on how you want to read your gospel accounts, when does Jesus find this out? Some would say it's not until John the Baptist, somebody proclaiming his divinity, right? Did he always know, or was it revealed to him? That's something that you'd have to look at in mythic tradition. But I don't think he's necessarily a savior king in the same way like Romulus would be.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll move on. I'll hold my thoughts on that one. Is there any evidence that Thecla was a real person, Pat?
I wish. So I've actually been to Bulgaria, been to caves where the earliest Christian depictions of Thecla and again are her famous journey. I would love to think so, but she appears to be in a largely invented, if not entirely invented, narrative. Yeah, Paul and her would have been great.
Thoughts on the historical Jesus being a Pharisee because the Pharisees engaged with Jesus as a legitimate rabbi? I'd have to look more into this, but I don't think Jesus was actually a Pharisee. There's no evidence that he went through.
He doesn't really sound like a Pharisee. Well, I mean, the gospel Jesus doesn't really sound like a Pharisee.
Yeah, and they're only, it's very unlikely, like we were talking about earlier with him being born in Galilee. It's very unlikely he would have gone through the education system, but I think the Pharisees engaging with him like he's a Pharisee is just the author's attempt to make him.
So there were two ways you became a Pharisee in general in this time period we're talking about, first century, and you were either born into it. Jesus wasn't; he was the son of a carpenter, so that lineage prospect wasn't there, or you were selected early and trained. So given that lack of those two attestations, I don't think there's any evidence to even suggest even in entertaining it.
So I feel like maybe I should say something here at this point too. I think people oftentimes have misunderstandings about who the Pharisees were, and quite often based on, and the reason for this is because the Gospels so badly polemicize these people that that turns them into cartoon characters. The Pharisees were two misconceptions. They were not, at the time of Jesus at least, they were not certainly most of them were not the power brokers in the region, right, in terms of controlling the state, interacting with Rome. This was a large group of Jews who observed a type of Judaism in which they could not just live it out within the Eretz, the land of Israel, but also all across the empire because of temple proximity and such. And it wasn't, you didn't have to be rich to be a Pharisee. You didn't have to be politically connected to be a Pharisee. There certainly were Pharisees who were wealthy and politically connected, but it wasn't a prerequisite. That's much more in line with becoming a Sadducee or a Tzadokite.
Right.
I gotta share something.
Oh, and one thing about the video, Sicarii calling someone a like assassin, that would only have been from the Roman point of view. From the Jewish point of view, the Sicarii were holy warriors who were doing God's work on earth. And even among people that weren't extremely violent, understood they played an important military role for the eventual reestablishment of the kingdom. So,
sorry, I didn't mean for that to pop up on the screen just then while you were talking, but
no, that's totally cool.
This made me chuckle.
Oh wow,
that was awful. But yeah, and again, I think Kip made a really good point. So anybody could become a Pharisee, but the selection process was there. It was like, because if you're going to be trained, it was an investment by the community for you. So either your father was one and he trained you, or you were selected. So
I question
Kip. Wow.
Eyesight here.
You notice I got ignored on that. That is awesome.
Let's see. I think I had some older questions I didn't get.
No love now. No love.
Not too late. Damage is done.
Yep.
Damage is done.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Doesn't Luke have Jesus reading Greek Isaiah? Is it Luke or Matthew? One of those two. He goes to the synagogue and he's reading out of Septuagint allegedly. But that again, that's just the author trying to portray Jesus as being able to read.
Because if this actually happened, he sure wouldn't be reading out of the.
Yeah, you wouldn't just waltz into the fucking temple and pick up the scroll. Like it's not
a synagogue, and also the scroll wouldn't have been a Greek copy of Isaiah either. There's no way.
Really?
So, I tend to think not. I mean, the evidence that we have there have been excavations of synagogues in and around Palestine, and they all contain nothing but Hebrew scrolls. One of the more recent ones actually was I don't remember where it was located, but it's pretty neat. The IAA, the Israel Antiquities Authority, had these charred up rolls, these scrolls that looked like cigars that they've been sitting in their archives for decades because they're too fragile to open. And then it was in 2014, I think, a group in Kentucky developed this really cool system of basically being able to digitally map the things.
Yeah, scan it and then like unroll it digitally. Yeah, I've seen that.
Yep. Yeah, it's wild.
Shit.
Yes, it turned out to be a copy of the Book of Leviticus from about 130. It's pretty. Yeah, it's badass.
No Septuagints though, huh?
No, as far as I know, you haven't found any.
It is
Greek scripture texts in the synagogues.
Yeah, it's Luke 4:17, by the way, through like 21 or 22.
Oh, okay.
It is Luke.
Oh, look, Pat, you're good people.
Cool.
Isaiah was written by Sadducees, chapter 11. Zechariah was written by Sadducees, Zechariah 9 through 11. Pat, you got any idea?
This isn't. I mean, I can talk about the social and status, but not my.
I mean, I said Pat.
I would say that the period is wrong. I mean, these are Zechariah 9, I think, is Second Temple, if I remember correctly. But Isaiah 11 is like 800. It's like 8th century. Sorry, not 800. It's like 700 to 8th century BCE when there were no Sadducees. So no. And I would tend to think too. I'm not confident that the Sadducees or the Zadokites as a group, we can trace much further back than the 300s maybe. So
interesting. All right. Well, if nobody else has any more questions, I am quite tired, and my kids are going to get up at like 5 in the morning, and
Yay!
So
Exciting.
before we go, since he's still in the office, I want to get in the audience before he leaves. But exploring reality, Than,
He's still there.
Yep. If at some point I want to throw this out there, I think Kip would be willing to do it as well.
Totally.
If you guys want to do like a Zoom chat, something like that, where 3 or 4 or 5 of us hang out, talk, do some scholarship, I'm more than willing to extend that, and we can make it a little larger.
Or
let's just engage in some scholarship at first, like some talking, see where people, what page people are on. I think that would be great as well. So I'll extend that.
Well, you know what?
Before we duke it out,
I will second it.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Oh wait, we got one more. What's the deal with the temple sacrifice bullshit, and why did Jesus put stop to it, but it will come back in Revelation?
He didn't.
Yeah, the Messiah, or one of the Messiahs, was supposed to put an end to it, and then it's supposed to be like brought back after God establishes his kingdom on earth, and that's in Zechariah.
It's important to understand there was someone who put an end to it. They were the Romans.
Yeah, there's that.
Like
and before the Romans, it was the the Seleucids.
And if you were in Samaria, it was I believe it was the Hasmoneans, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. By the way, the other, Torah observant people in the region, their temple was destroyed by the other Torah observant people in the region.
Yep.
So,
do you guys know there's still an active community of Samaritans?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're worshiping at Mount Gerizim.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty cool. Dafa Raphael. Was that the first question?
Yeah, that was the giant super chat.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So,
I was very, very sorry about that.
Oh, I got it here. Do you need to pull it up, or can I just read it?
You can read it, but I'm pull it up. I gotta like manually scroll all the way to the top.
How crazy is the fluidity of the Old Testament text depending on the period? It can be pretty crazy. In the Second Temple period, I would argue, and it's a debated point in large part because scholars sort of fall all over the spectrum. One of the problems here is just defining what even is a biblical text, which is something that I'll be getting into in my next video on the Dead Sea Scrolls. So there are periods of fluidity that I would say are fairly operative all the way up to the destruction of the Second Temple, and in particular, the Bar Kokhba revolt in the 130s. Did Jesus make a mistake when he said jot and tittle will not pass away? I'm not sure he said that, but where the gospel has him saying that, I don't know. I mean, it hasn't yet. Well, I mean, I guess it depends on what qualifies as Jesus's scriptures, because we don't know. Also, it's not God breathed, like Paul said. What about forgeries? And Jews made up some stuff. So I think Paul is badly misunderstood when he uses this term theopneustos. Theopneustos is the unfortunate thing about it is it's an unusual word that you don't find a lot of places. So when unusual words are used and we're trying to understand what they mean, it's more difficult because we don't have a lot of comparanda through which to sift through in order to get a gauge on the usage and meanings of words. And theopneustos is one of these terms. As far as I know, it appears on, I think it appears in like a tomb inscription from the 2nd century, and it appears in a few other places post-dating Paul. My personal view is that his understanding of inspiration is pretty clearly spelled out in what follows. These are texts that are useful for teaching, for doctrine, for instruction in the way of righteousness, and he actually leaves it pretty open-ended in terms of what qualifies. I don't think Paul had a sense of the Bible, certainly not the way we do. And I think we really have no idea what Paul's Bible looked like. And finally, forgeries, and Jews made up some stuff. Yes, there are forgeries. There are ancient forgeries and modern forgeries, and they can be pretty interesting. Some of the modern ones are quite frustrating. And Jews made up some stuff. I mean, doesn't everybody?
The only thing I would say is, given the literature of the period and the style of how a lot of people use these terms that are outside, I think God breathed is actually not the best translation from a cultural context.
No.
I think divinely whispered is actually a better translation of the text, because that parallels how ancient people believe this information came to them. Like, example, again, going back to, I always start with the earliest literature I can. We look at Homer, the muses whisper into your ear what the gods would have you reveal, right? And that's a common trope that just continues. And since Paul is writing in Greek, he's obviously trained in Greek literature. And so saying God breathed, I think that's a Christian affirmation later. I think he's saying it's divinely whispered to me. I think it's a better way of reading the text.
I think you're right about that, actually.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Just because Christianity's fallen, does that make Islam true? Yeah, of course not. There are certain things that Christianity gets wrong or gets right that Islam gets wrong. There's certain things that Islam gets right that Christianity gets wrong.
I know people. Everybody gets things wrong.
Yeah, right. Like that. Islam rejects the Trinity. That's sorry. They win that one. The Trinity was a much later development. It was not biblical at all. So they're right to reject that. But Islam also rejects the entire Old Testament and New Testament. Like it rejects a lot of historical things that have happened in New Testament that we can be pretty sure did actually happen.
Instructions there of the history.
It's just one guy who comes along and says God's giving me these, or the archangel, whatever, Michael's giving me, Gabriel, and he's saying, Gabriel's telling me none of that happened, and what I'm about to say is what actually happened. Like the whole Jesus wasn't actually crucified thing. We have a lot of sources saying Jesus was crucified. A lot of them.
We don't want to talk about textual transmission either.
No.
No, we'll be up all night. So. We could answer. I can answer Michael's question in a minute.
Please.
Did the Masoretic editors change the Septuagint text, or did the Septuagint translators change the original Hebrew text? The answer is yes and no. Pretty good, eh? Actually, but I will just qualify this. So the Septuagint isn't like a full single translation of the whole Bible. Individual books were translated individually into Greek. They were translated by different people. In some instances, you have texts that I believe clearly predate what survives in the Masoretic text, such as the Book of Jeremiah. I think the Septuagint version is an older version. Same with the Book of Exodus. But it's a much more complicated picture. What we do know is that by and large, the Septuagint was working from Hebrew manuscripts, many of which are different from the Hebrew manuscripts that survived to become the Masoretic text. Is that good?
Yeah, that was fantastic. Okay. Yeah, I think we're done. Yeah, I think we're gonna
go to bed, Deadpool.
I'm ready. My body is ready.
You look ready. Can you make it to the bed?
Oh man. Oh yeah. Oh, I'll make it to bed. Like that. Just wait. Thanks again, you guys. This was really a really interesting stream. I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, I did too.
I enjoy all my streams, but this one was a little bit different, and I like to change it up every now and then. So this is cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Don't forget, if those y'all who stuck around, thank you again. By the way, the links in below. Like, follow, subscribe. Not to me. I don't give a shit if you like or follow me. I really don't care. Subscribe to Dr. Kip's channel. Subscribe to Dr. or Pat's blog.
No.
Sorry. Or don't. Want to make sure I do.
And if you want to subscribe to Pat's channel, then just make a sock puppet and subscribe to me again.
There you go.
You've got a channel, don't you? Or
I do.
you?
Yeah,
Oh,
Discovering
wow.
Ancient History with Pat Lowinger. Yeah, but it's if you're not into archaeology, it can be, if you like looking at ancient sites and me walking around you with them, then you might.
I didn't put yours in the description, did I? Shit.
It's all right. I haven't had time to put content in, but this summer I'll load it up again because we're excavating a lot more bodies this year.
Oh, very fun.
Ooh, excavating bodies. That sounds
Pat
fun.
gets to do fun
Remains.
things.
I do. That's why I chose archaeology. You chose texts. I chose.
Yeah, I
chose
get to
ancient
sit
things.
on my ass.
I
Stare
chose
at computers.
parenting. That was the worst idea ever.
Yes, it was.
Why did I do that?
Yes.
All right. Thanks again, everybody.
All right.
Y'all have a wonderful night. Stay
all.
tuned for more bullshit. Well, oh, wait. I have an outro. Sometimes I forget to play my outro. I'm not going to forget this time.
Hold on to your butts.